Hello guys, welcome to Watch Harry. Today we have an incredible story for you. Petunia hired Cursebreaker at age 7 who found Dumbledore forged 4 wills and stole Harry's seat on Wizengamot. If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The doorstep. The letter had lived in the bottom of Petunia Dursley's winter coat pocket for 7 years. She hadn't meant to keep it. The night she'd found him, bundled in blankets on the front step with the November wind cutting straight off the street, she'd read it once, standing in the doorway in her dressing gown, Vernon huffing behind her, and then she'd shoved it into her pocket because her hands needed to be free to pick up the child. She'd meant to throw it away. She kept forgetting. Or perhaps she kept not forgetting, which was a different thing entirely. It was a Tuesday in October when she found it again. Dudley was at school. Vernon was at work. Harry was in the garden pulling weeds because Petunia had told him to, which was the only reason she ever sent him outside, not cruelty, exactly, but a kind of reflexive management, the same way she deadhead roses without thinking about it. She watched him through the kitchen window while she went through her coat pockets looking for the dry-cleaning ticket, and her fingers closed around a folded square of paper that had gone soft at the creases from years of being carried and ignored. She read it at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold at her elbow. She'd forgotten how short it was. She'd remembered it as longer, somehow, a full explanation, a justification, a manual. It was barely a paragraph. I am sure you will understand the gravity of what is being asked. He is safe with you. The blood protection will hold. Trust that this is the only way. Signed with that looping, infuriating confidence. No apology. No question mark anywhere in it. Not a single sentence that acknowledged she was a person who might have thoughts about a baby appearing on her doorstep. Trust that this is the only way. Petunia set the letter down and looked out at Harry, who was 7 years old and too thin and was pulling weeds with a focus that no 7-year-old should have to apply to anything. He'd made a neat pile of them by the garden wall. He hadn't been told to make them neat. She thought about Lily. She thought about Lily the way she usually didn't let herself, which was directly, without the buffer of resentment she normally kept between herself and the memory. Lily had been dead for 6 years. She'd been killed by a man whose name Petunia had only heard in whispers, by a world Petunia had been told, very kindly, very firmly, that she wasn't part of. And the man who'd told her that, the man who'd written this letter, had left Lily's son on a doorstep in November and signed off with trust that this is the only way and presumably gone home to wherever he lived and slept very soundly. Petunia picked up the phone. She called a number she'd written on the inside back cover of her address book 6 years ago, at Lily's funeral, in the car park of the church because she hadn't been allowed inside. The magical service had been separate, of course, and the few people from that world who'd come to the Muggle one had stood slightly apart and looked at Petunia with expressions ranging from pity to discomfort. Except one woman. A woman with very straight posture and a dark coat who had pressed a card into Petunia's hand when they shook hands and said, quietly, if you ever need help with anything related to your sister's world, call this number first. Don't call anyone else first. Call this one. The card had been for a solicitor's office in Edinburgh. Petunia had never called. She called now. The woman who answered was not the woman from the funeral. She was an assistant, professional and careful, who asked the nature of Petunia's inquiry. Petunia said she needed to speak to someone about her nephew's inheritance and the management of his affairs by a third party she had not authorized. There was a pause. Then the assistant asked for her name and address and said someone would be in touch. Someone was in touch by Thursday. Not the solicitor, a man named Silas Vane, who said he'd been referred by the firm and who asked, on the phone, whether Petunia would prefer to discuss the matter in person. His voice was dry and unhurried. He sounded like a man who was used to people being surprised by things he already knew. Petunia said yes. She said Saturday, when Vernon would be watching football at his brother's. She gave the address. She did not tell Vernon. Vernon, by that point, had made his position on anything related to Harry's world very clear, very loudly, and repeatedly. She had stopped arguing with him about it. She had stopped arguing with him about most things. That was a separate problem for a separate time. Silas Vane arrived at 9 in the morning on a cool Saturday in October, and he was not what Petunia had expected. She'd built a picture in her head, tall, perhaps, robes, the slightly theatrical quality she'd observed in everyone from Lily's world. Vane was medium height, wearing a very ordinary dark jacket over dark trousers, with the kind of face that had done a lot of weather in it. He was carrying a leather satchel that had seen better decades and a cardboard cup of coffee that he'd apparently bought from somewhere between wherever he'd come from and Privet Drive. He looked at the house, looked at Petunia in the doorway, and said, "Mrs. Dursley." Silas Vane. "I worked with Gringotts for 14 years before I went independent. I understand you have concerns about your nephew's estate." "Come in," Petunia said. Harry was in the kitchen eating toast. He looked up when they came in, and Petunia watched him do what he always did with new adults, a quick, quiet assessment, weight redistributed slightly, not afraid exactly but ready, which was a thing she'd never quite made herself examine because examining it would have required examining her own role in producing it. She felt that now, looking at him. A sharp, uncomfortable thing. "Harry," she said, "this is Mr. Vane. He works in the same world your mother came from." Harry looked at Vane with considerably more interest. "Are you a wizard?" "I am," Vane said. He didn't say it in the slightly condescending way Petunia had heard adults use with children, the bright, oversimplified tone. He just said it, matter of fact, and pulled out the chair across from Harry and sat down without being invited. "I'm a curse breaker." "You know what that is?" "No," Harry said. "People put magical protections on things they want to keep, vaults, tombs, estates, contracts. My job is to get past those protections when they've been used to keep something from someone who has a right to it." He opened his satchel and pulled out a folder. "In your case, I've been asked to look at your family's magical estate. The money, the property, the legal rights. Make sure everything is where it's supposed to be and no one's helped themselves to something that wasn't theirs." Harry absorbed this. "And if someone has? Then we deal with it." Vane looked at him steadily. "You're James and Lily Potter's son. Your family name carries a seat on the Wizengamot, that's the governing body of magical Britain, roughly equivalent to the House of Lords if the Lords also had the power to sentence people to prison. Your family vault at Gringotts is one of the older ones. You have rights and assets that should have been managed by a guardian with legal authority since your parents died." He paused. "Do you know who's been managing them?" Harry shook his head. "That," Vane said, "is the first problem." Petunia sat down at the table. She'd been standing in the doorway of her own kitchen like a visitor, she realized, and made herself take the chair beside Harry. "I was never asked," she said. "I was never told. He left a letter saying the boy was safe with me and that I should trust him." "Who's he?" Harry asked. "Albus Dumbledore," Vane said. "Headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot. Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards." He said the titles without particular emphasis. "A great many titles. He's held most of them for a very long time." "Is he the one managing my family's things?" "I don't know yet. That's why I'm here." Vane took a piece of paper out of the folder and slid it across to Petunia. "This is a standard authorization for me to act on your nephew's behalf in conducting an estate audit with Gringotts. As his guardian, you can sign it. It will allow the goblins to open the full account record, not just what's in the vault, but every transaction, every authorization, every proxy order that's been submitted in the Potter name going back to the date of your sister's death." Petunia looked at the paper. It was covered in very small, precise text, and at the bottom was a signature line. She looked up. "What do you think you're going to find?" Vane was quiet for a moment. He drank his coffee. "I've seen this pattern before," he said. "Not with your nephew specifically, generally. A wealthy magical family, both parents dead, sole surviving heir a minor, no immediate magical relatives to contest anything. It's an opportunity for anyone with access to the estate structure to make adjustments." He said adjustments the way other people said crimes. "I think we're going to find that adjustments have been made." "By Dumbledore?" "I think we're going to find authorization documents signed by someone with power of attorney over the Potter estate. And I think we're going to find that no one who was legally entitled to hold that power of attorney was ever asked about it." He looked at Harry. "You understand what I'm saying?" "Someone took things that belonged to my family," Harry said. "And they did it while pretending they were allowed to." "That's one way to put it." Vane almost smiled. "It wasn't warm, exactly, but it was real." "You're a sharp kid." "I read a lot," Harry said. "Aunt Petunia's books." He glanced at her. "She doesn't mind." Petunia had not known Harry spent his free time reading her books. She found, in the moment, that she couldn't speak, so she picked up the pen and signed the authorization paper. Her signature was very neat. She'd always had neat handwriting. Lily's had been sprawling and fast, like everything about her. They went to London on Monday, because Petunia had read the authorization document twice more over the weekend and decided she wasn't waiting any longer. She told Harry they were going to London for his family business, and Harry had nodded with the slightly preternatural composure he sometimes had, went upstairs, put on the least oversized of his hand-me-down jumpers, and came back down looking as ready as a 7-year-old could look. Vernon had noticed none of this. Vernon was in a phase of noticing very little, which suited Petunia. The entrance to the Leaky Cauldron was on Charing Cross Road, and Petunia stood in front of it for a moment because the last time she'd been here she'd been 18 years old and furious and heartbroken, watching Lily walk in ahead of her to buy school supplies, and the world had parted for Lily like water. Petunia had stood outside, unable to see the door at all. She could see it now. A side effect, Vane had told her, of having a magical child in her direct care. The blood protection Dumbledore had established had an interesting consequence. It had tethered her, however slightly, to the magical world. She could perceive what she couldn't before. She wondered if Dumbledore had known that would happen. She decided, with a cold certainty she recognized as very like Lily's certainty when Lily had been angry about something, that he probably had. Inside the Leaky Cauldron, Harry looked at everything without being obvious about it, which was a skill Petunia recognized as something children learned when they'd been told too many times not to stare. She put her hand briefly on his shoulder, not quite a squeeze, but pressure, and he looked up at her with an expression that was trying not to be surprised. She let her hand drop. Vane moved through the pub like he'd been there 10 minutes ago and before that 100 times, nodding at the barman, steering them through to the back. Harry touched the worn brick wall that led to Diagon Alley and went very still. "What?" Petunia said. "I can feel it," he said. There's something on the other side. Like a hum." Vane looked at him. "You can feel a sealed ward boundary without a wand or training? Is that not normal?" Harry asked. "No," Vane said. There was something different in how he was looking at Harry now. "Not alarm, recalibration. Stand back." He tapped the bricks himself and the wall dissolved into the archway, and Diagon Alley opened up before them in the mid-morning light, cobblestones and crooked shop fronts and the distant gleam of Gringotts at the far end. Harry said nothing. He just looked, and Petunia watched him take it in, this world that was half his by blood and inheritance, that had been kept from him as thoroughly as it had been kept from her, and she felt something in her chest that she refused to examine and simply catalogued as necessary. This was necessary. Doing this now, like this, was necessary. Gringotts smelled of stone and metal and something older than either. The goblins at the high desks barely glanced up as they came in. Petunia had been braced for something spectacular and found instead an institution, efficient, impersonal, organized with a precision that felt almost aggressive. Vane didn't go to the public desks. He went to a side corridor and spoke to a goblin in what sounded like a completely different language, guttural and fast, with that slightly angular quality that made Petunia think of a language that had never tried to be pleasant. The goblin looked at Harry. Harry looked back without looking away, which seemed to make an impression, because the goblin said something to Vane that included what was unmistakably a note of approval. "He says you have your mother's eyes," Vane told Harry, coming back. "People keep saying that," Harry said. "What did you say to him?" "I told him we're here for a full estate audit under Gringotts Charter Article 17, which allows a minor heir to request a complete accounting of all actions taken under proxy authority on their family vault." He said it without slowing down. "It's a provision that doesn't get used often because most people don't know it exists." "You do." "I know most things that don't get used often. That's most of my job." They were taken through to a private meeting room, smaller than the grand main hall, with a table of dark stone and chairs that were sized for goblins and consequently uncomfortable for humans. A goblin named Ragnarok, who introduced himself as senior accounts manager for the Potter family, came in with a stack of ledgers that he set down on the table with the air of someone who had been waiting for this meeting for a while and was experiencing complex feelings about it. "Mr. Potter," Ragnarok said, and the respect in his voice was unambiguous. "It is past time." Harry, who had been looking around the room with the same contained attention he'd been giving everything all morning, focused on Ragnarok fully. "Has someone been using my family's accounts without permission?" Ragnarok looked at Vane. "He can ask directly," Vane said. "He's the heir." "Yes," Ragnarok said. "Someone has." The ledger he opened was a thick one, with entries going back years. He walked them through it, not all of it, not the raw numbers, but the structure. The proxy authorizations. The signatures on documents that redirected funds, managed property, cast legal votes in the Potter name. Every single one of them signed by the same person, with a power of attorney document attached that named Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore as the legal magical guardian of Harry James Potter. "That's not right," Petunia said. The words came out very flat. "I am his guardian. I am his legal guardian. He lives in my house. He has lived in my house since he was 1 year old." "In the Muggle legal system, yes," Ragnarok said. "This document was filed with the Ministry of Magic's Department of Magical Law Enforcement under a provision that allows a magical guardian to be appointed for a Muggle-raised magical child without the knowledge or consent of the Muggle guardian." "Is that actually a provision?" Vane asked. Ragnarok's expression, which had been professionally neutral, shifted into something that was not quite a smile. "It was not a provision that existed prior to November 2, 1981, he said. "It was added to the Ministry Registry on November 3. The room was quiet for a moment. "The day after my parents died," Harry said. "Yes, Mr. Potter." Harry was looking at the ledger. His face hadn't changed much, he was still composed, still doing that quiet, watchful thing, but his hands, which were resting on the table, had gone very still in the particular way that meant a person was being careful not to show what they were feeling. Petunia recognized it because she did the same thing. She recognized it, and she hated that he'd had 7 years to learn it. "How much?" he asked. "I beg your pardon? How much has been taken?" "Total. From all the accounts." Ragnarok consulted the ledger. He named a number. Vane let out a breath that was almost a word. Petunia kept her face very still. Harry nodded, once, as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. "And the Wizengamot seat?" "I heard Mr. Vane say my family has one." "Your family holds 2 seats, in fact. The Potter seat, which is hereditary, and the Peveril seat, which passes through the male line and which you inherit through your paternal grandmother." Ragnarok turned a page. "Both seats have been proxy voted in your name for the past 6 years. All votes cast in favor of measures supported by Albus Dumbledore." Has he voted against anything I'd have wanted? Harry asked. It was such a precise, adult question, framed so clearly, that Ragnok paused before answering. He looked at Harry with something that went slightly past professional respect. There were 3 motions regarding the reform of prisoner rights at Azkaban, he said. All 3 were voted down with your proxy votes included in the opposition count. There were also 2 motions regarding the establishment of an independent audit of ministry financial oversight. Both were voted down. So he used my votes to stop oversight, Harry said. And to keep people in Azkaban. That is one reading of the record. Harry looked at Vane. What are the forged wills? Vane leaned forward. That's the piece I hadn't confirmed yet. He looked at Ragnok. Are they here? Ragnok produced 4 separate documents, each sealed with official-looking ministry marks. These were filed as the last will and testament of, respectively, James Potter, Lily Potter, Fleamont Potter, Harry's paternal grandfather, who died 3 months before Harry's birth, and Euphemia Potter, the paternal grandmother. Each will names Albus Dumbledore as executor of the estate and as magical guardian of any surviving minor heirs. The signatures, Vane said. Ragnok opened a drawer and placed beside each will a separate document, Gringotts authentication reports, stamped and dated, conducted not by Ragnok but by the Goblin Forensic Division, whose work Vane had apparently already requested. The signatures on all 4 wills are forgeries, Ragnok said. Magical forgeries, which is why they were not caught by standard ministry review. They are very good forgeries. But goblins invented the detection method that identifies them. When were the reports done? Petunia asked. I requested them 6 weeks ago, Vane said. When I was contacted by the firm in Edinburgh. He looked at her. I always do preliminary work before a first meeting. It saves time. Petunia thought about the 6 weeks she'd spent not knowing this while Harry pulled weeds in her garden. Then she thought about the 6 years before that. Then she stopped. More actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now. Chapter 2, The Shape of a Stolen Fortune. Ragnok gave them copies of everything. He produced them from a second drawer with the air of someone who had prepared for this meeting long before it was scheduled, which Vane later confirmed was exactly the case. Goblins, he explained as they walked back through the main hall, did not simply manage accounts. They watched them. They noticed things. And when things that should not happen began happening in one of their oldest accounts, they kept records the way a careful person keeps evidence, quietly, precisely, without telling the people responsible that anyone was paying attention. They've been waiting for someone to come and ask, Harry said. Yes. How long? Vane held the door for Petunia, who walked through it without breaking stride. Ragnok told me in the preliminary correspondence that the irregularities began within a week of your parents' death. The earliest forged authorization is dated November 8, 1981. You were 13 months old. Harry walked out into Diagon Alley and stood in the late morning light with the folder of copied documents tucked under his arm. Ragnok had given it to him directly, not to Vane, not to Petunia, and looked up the alley toward the shops and the people moving between them. He looked like he was doing arithmetic. So for my whole life, he said, someone has been using my family's money and my family's name to vote the way they wanted in their government. And none of the adults around me knew. Your aunt knew something was wrong, Vane said. She didn't know what. Harry looked at Petunia. She met his eyes and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would improve the moment. She had spent 7 years managing Harry at arm's length, and the distance between that and protecting Harry had never felt larger than it did right now. Okay, Harry said. He filed this away somewhere. She could see him do it, the same way she filed things, in a private cabinet with a lock on it. What happens now? Now, Vane said, we eat something, because it is nearly noon and I have not had a real meal since yesterday, and then I explain the legal structure of what we're looking at and what our options are. There was a cafe 2 streets off Diagon Alley proper, a small, warm place with square tables and a daily menu chalked on a board. the kind of establishment that didn't attract crowds because it didn't try to. Vane clearly knew it. The woman behind the counter nodded at him without being asked and brought out 3 plates without taking an order. Harry looked at his plate, a thick slice of bread, some kind of savory pastry, and a pile of roasted vegetables that were improbably good, and ate with the focused attention of someone who was used to not having enough and had learned not to comment on when they did. This was another thing Petunia catalogued and did not examine. Later. She would examine it later, when she was alone and could afford to. The wills are the most important piece, Vane said, pulling out a battered notepad. He wrote quickly and his handwriting was precise for a man who wrote fast. For forged wills establishing Dumbledore as executor and magical guardian. That's the legal spine of everything else, the proxy authority over the accounts, the Wizengamot votes, all of it flows from those documents. Pull the wills and you pull the authorization. Can they be pulled? Petunia asked. They've been in place for 6 years. They can, and the process for doing it actually works in our favor. Vane circled something on his notepad. Gringotts has standing to file a formal fraud complaint with the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. That's a different route than Harry or you filing a complaint, because Gringotts is not a party that gets brushed aside. They have the forensic evidence, they have the authenticated forgery reports, and they have 6 years of transaction records. When Gringotts says a document is fraudulent, the ministry listens. It cannot afford not to. What about Dumbledore's position? Petunia said. He's the chief warlock. He practically is the Wizengamot. He is the chief warlock, Vane agreed. Which means we don't go through the Wizengamot to begin with. We go through the DMLE. The head is Amelia Bones, she's honest, she's efficient, and she doesn't owe Dumbledore anything particular. If the Gringotts complaint is filed correctly and delivered directly to her office, she's obligated to open an inquiry. You've worked with her before, Harry said. Vane looked at him. What makes you say that? The way you said her name. You said Dumbledore's titles. You just said her name. The notepad paused. Vane looked at Harry for a moment with that recalibrating expression he'd had in the meeting room when Harry felt the ward boundary. Yes, he said. I've worked with her before. On a separate matter, 7 years ago. She's trustworthy. Are you? Harry asked. Petunia looked at her nephew. He wasn't being rude. He was asking the question the same way he'd asked every other question that morning, directly, without apology, as if it was simply the logical next thing to know. Vane, to his credit, did not look offended. I was recommended to your aunt by a solicitor who has represented families like yours for 30 years, Vane said. My fee is paid by the hour and itemized in detail. I have no prior relationship with Dumbledore, professional or personal, and I spent 14 years at Gringotts where I learned that the most dangerous thing in magical Britain is an old man who has been trusted for so long that no one examines what he does. He held Harry's gaze. You're right to ask. Keep asking questions like that about everyone you work with, including me. Harry considered this, then nodded. He ate the rest of his pastry. What's a peveril? Vane blinked at the subject change. I beg your pardon. Ragnarok said I have 2 Wizengamot seats. The Potter one and the Peveril one. What's Peveril? Vane set down his pen. That's a significant piece of history that requires some background. Then give me the background. They stayed in the cafe for another hour. Vane explained the Peveril line, one of the oldest magical families in Britain, attributed in legend to 3 brothers and 3 legendary objects, died out in the direct male line centuries ago but with the inheritance passing through collateral descendants, of which Harry, through his paternal grandmother Euphemia Peveril, was currently the most direct. The seat had been dormant for decades because no one had bothered to claim it. Or possibly because someone had ensured the most recent heir was kept unaware of it. Harry listened to all of this without interrupting. When Vane finished, he said, "So I have 2 votes on the Wizengamot that Dumbledore has been casting for 6 years. And when we get them back, his majority in the chamber changes. His consistent majority, yes. By a meaningful margin." "He knows that," Harry said. "He must know that taking the seats back will change the balance." "Almost certainly. Then he'll move to stop it before it happens." Harry looked at Vane. "What's the fastest way to establish my claim before he can?" Petunia watched Vane look at her nephew again, that third look, the look he'd been recalibrating toward ever since the ward boundary in the alley, and she could see the moment that Silas Vane, who had said he was a professional and not a mentor, stopped being just a professional. "Gringotts can establish the hereditary claim independently of the ministry," Vane said. "If Ragnarok files the fraud complaint and simultaneously issues a formal recognition of heir status for both seats, the Wizengamot is legally bound to acknowledge it within 30 days. Dumbledore can object, but he'd be objecting in his capacity as chief warlock to a Gringotts hereditary certification, which is the kind of move that looks very bad publicly." "File them at the same time," Harry said. "So he can't stop one before the other goes through." "That would be the strategy, yes." "Can Ragnarok do it today?" Vane looked at the time. "If we go back now, possibly." Harry stood up and picked up his folder. He looked at Petunia. "Can we?" Petunia had not finished her tea. She drank it in 2 swallows and stood up. "Yes," she said. Ragnarok could do it, and he did it, with the satisfaction of a goblin who had been waiting 6 years to do exactly this. He produced 2 additional documents, the fraud complaint, with all forensic evidence attached, addressed directly to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and the formal certification of heir status, signed under Gringotts' charter seal, recognizing Harry James Potter as Lord Potter of the Ancient and Noble House of Potter and Lord Peveril of the Ancient and Most Noble House of Peveril. Harry signed them. His signature was a child's signature, still a little uneven, still finding its size, but he signed his full name, Harry James Potter, without hesitation. "These will be delivered by Goblin Courier," Ragnarok said. "The fraud complaint to Director Bones's office by close of business today. The heir certification to the Wizengamot registry by morning." "Not through the Ministry Owl service," Vane confirmed. It wasn't a question. "Gringotts does not use Ministry Owls for sensitive documents," Ragnarok said, and managed to make this sound like something he'd been saying to slightly slow people for years. "We have our own couriers." "What happens after they receive it?" Harry asked. "Director Bones is required, under DMLE protocol, to open a preliminary inquiry within 5 working days of receiving a formal fraud complaint with forensic evidence attached. She will need to contact Gringotts to verify the documents, and Gringotts will verify them, and at that point she has no discretionary authority, she must proceed." Ragnarok looked at Harry over the ledger. "As for the Wizengamot registry, once the certification is logged, Professor Dumbledore's proxy authority over both seats is automatically suspended pending resolution of the fraud complaint. He cannot cast a vote in your name after tomorrow morning." "He'll know something's happened," Harry said. "Yes. How quickly will he know?" "When the certification is logged, notification will be sent to the current proxy holder that their authority has been suspended." Ragnarok's expression was precisely neutral. "That notification will go out with the morning correspondence. So by tomorrow he'll know." Harry nodded. He looked at Vane. "We should be ready for him to do something." "What would you expect him to do?" Vane asked. Harry thought for a moment. He was 7, sitting in a goblin bank in a world he'd learned about 2 weeks ago, thinking about a man whose name he'd first heard this morning and who had spent 6 years managing his inheritance without his knowledge. He looked, in that moment, like someone who had been waiting for a fight for a while and was mainly focused on making sure the ground was right before it started. "He'll come to the house," Harry said. "He'll want to talk to Aunt Petunia. He'll want to explain why what he did was necessary and why we should trust him." "Probably," Vane agreed. We shouldn't let him. Agreed. Harry looked at Petunia. If he comes to Privet Drive, don't let him in. Petunia thought about the letter in her coat pocket. Trust that this is the only way. She thought about 7 years of managing a child at arm's length, of Vernon's loud opinions, of missing Lily in the dry, controlled way she allowed herself to miss her. She thought about a power of attorney document filed on November 3, 1981, the day after her sister died, when the ink on the forged wills hadn't even finished drying. He won't get past the door, she said. On the train back from London, Harry fell asleep. He was still holding the folder from Ragnarok. He'd been holding it since the bank. Petunia reached over, after a few minutes, and moved it into her own hand so he could sleep properly, and she held it the whole way home. She thought about Lily. Not the resentment version. Not the "it was easy for you everything came naturally" version she'd been polishing since she was 9 years old. She thought about Lily the person, Lily who had been funny and stubborn and occasionally absolutely infuriating, who had written long letters about a world Petunia couldn't enter and who had never quite stopped hoping that Petunia would come around, even at the end. Lily who had loved a man named James and made a boy named Harry and died for both of them before she was 22. Lily had not wanted this. Lily had not wanted her son left on a doorstep with a letter. Petunia knew this the way she knew things she'd never been told, in the place behind the sternum where certain certainties lived. Lily would have wanted, not Petunia specifically, because Lily had been realistic about Petunia's limitations, but someone. Someone who knew the world, who could navigate it, who would make sure Harry had what was his. 7 years too late. No, she corrected herself. Not too late. Late. Different thing. Harry woke up as they pulled into the station, alert immediately in the way he always woke, not groggy, not slow, just present. He took back the folder when she held it out. Looked at her. Something moved in his face that wasn't quite gratitude and wasn't quite something else, a complex 7-year-old emotion that had too many parts. "Thank you," he said. Petunia nodded once and stood up. Vernon was not home when they arrived, which was a relief on every practical level. Petunia made sandwiches and Harry sat at the kitchen table and went through the copies from Ragnarok with a focused attention that she found both impressive and slightly heartbreaking, a 7-year-old treating documents about stolen inheritance as homework, cross-referencing dates, occasionally asking her what a word meant. Dudley arrived home from his friend's house at 4:30. He stopped in the kitchen doorway, looked at Harry surrounded by documents, looked at his mother, and performed the standard Dudley calculus of whether this was something that affected him. Deciding it wasn't, he announced he was hungry. "Sandwiches are on the counter," Petunia said. Dudley took 3 and retreated. He had, Petunia reflected, his father's gift for complete lack of curiosity about anything outside his immediate experience. She couldn't decide if this was fortunate or not. "Harry," she said, after Dudley had gone, "what Ragnarok said, the money that was redirected. Do you understand what that means for the main vault?" "It means there's less in it than there should be," Harry said. "Yes, but the amount that's there is it's still substantial. You're not poor." She said this because she wanted him to know it, because something in the way he'd reacted to the number in the bank had told her he'd been living as though he might be. "Your parents left you well provided for." Harry was quiet for a moment. "Ragnarok said the trust vault for my education was untouched. Is that right?" She checked her notes. "Yes. The Hogwarts trust vault. Apparently it had additional protections on it that made it harder to access. So they made sure I'd go to Hogwarts," Harry said. "They just made sure everything else was available to them while I waited to get there." The precision of this, "they made sure I'd go to Hogwarts," struck Petunia with a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the kitchen. Hogwarts was where Dumbledore was. Hogwarts was where a boy with no knowledge of his inheritance, no knowledge of his legal rights, no knowledge of the world he was walking into, would arrive at 11 years old and be, what? Grateful. Overwhelmed. Dependent. She said nothing. Harry had already worked it out. She could see it in the stillness of his hands. Vane called that evening. "The couriers have delivered," he said. Bones's office confirmed receipt at 4:50. "The certification has been logged with the Wizengamot registry and the notification has been queued for morning dispatch." A pause. "Ragnarok also informs me that someone attempted to access the Potter Vault records through a ministry proxy request at approximately 3 o'clock this afternoon." "Attempted," Petunia said. "Gringotts declined to provide the records. Under Article 17, once an estate audit has been initiated by the heir, no other party can access the records without the heir's written consent." Another pause, shorter. "The request was filed under Dumbledore's ministry credentials." Petunia was standing at the kitchen window. Harry had gone upstairs with his folder. The garden was dark. He already knows something is happening. He knows that someone has invoked Article 17. He may not know what we found or what we've filed. Yet. Vane's voice was measured. "I want to start Harry's education. His Hogwarts is 4 years away. Not Hogwarts. Practical education. The law, the political structure, his rights and how they function, basic magical theory. He's going to need to understand the landscape he's operating in before any of this goes to a hearing. He's 7, which is young, but given what I saw today, not as young as it matters." A brief pause. He felt a sealed ward boundary. "Without a wand. That's not normal, Mrs. Dursley. That's not close to normal." Petunia thought about what normal meant in a world where men forged wills and stole seats and left babies on doorsteps. "How often?" 3 times a week to start. "I can come to you, or we can meet at my office." "I'd prefer my office, it's warded, and private conversation is genuinely private there." "I'll speak to Harry." "He'll say yes," Vane said, and hung up. He was right. Harry said yes before she'd finished explaining, and then asked 3 questions about what warded meant and how it worked and whether he'd be able to feel the wards on Vane's office the way he'd felt the ward boundary in the alley. Petunia answered the ones she could and admitted she didn't know for the rest, and Harry accepted this with equanimity. Vernon came home at 9, smelling of beer and something fried, and navigated to the sitting-room couch with the practiced efficiency of a man who had been doing this for years. He noticed nothing out of the ordinary. Harry was already in bed. The documents from Ragnarok were in a lockbox Vane had provided at the end of their first meeting, magically sealed, keyed to Harry's touch and Petunia's, impossible to open otherwise. Petunia stood in the kitchen, the house settling around her into its nighttime noises, and allowed herself to think about what she'd done today. Not the rights and wrongs of it, she'd made her mind up about that before she'd signed the authorization form. She thought about the shape of it. The shape of the day. A goblin bank, a folder of evidence, a man who forged 4 wills and called it necessity, a boy who slept with a folder of documents about his stolen inheritance and who had, somewhere along the way, learned to wake up already watchful. She would fix this. Not because she'd been a warm guardian. Not because she'd done everything right for 7 years. She hadn't, and she knew it, and the knowledge sat in her chest with the rest of the things she knew about herself and managed rather than resolved. She would fix this because Lily had died in a world that Petunia had been excluded from, and the man who'd constructed her exclusion had then reached across it to take Lily's son's birthright, and the particular combination of grief and pride and fury that constituted Petunia Dursley at her core found this absolutely, immovably unacceptable. She went upstairs, checked that Harry was asleep, and found that she stood in the doorway of his room for a moment longer than she'd intended. He was 7 years old. He had Lily's eyes. He slept with one hand curled under his chin. She closed the door quietly. The notification arrived the next morning in a form Petunia hadn't expected, not an owl, but a very formal, very cream-colored envelope that appeared on the kitchen table between her second cup of tea and Harry's toast. It had the Wizengamot seal on it. Harry picked it up before she could and opened it. It was addressed to him. To Lord Harry James Potter, with both titles, Potter and Peveril, printed in full. It confirmed receipt of the Gringotts' hereditary certification and acknowledged that proxy authority over both Wizengamot seats had been suspended effective immediately. It was signed by the Wizengamot registry clerk and countersigned by the deputy chief warlock, whose signature was shaky and whose title existed precisely because there were moments when the chief warlock had a conflict of interest. Harry read it twice. He set it down on the table beside his toast. He ate his toast. Petunia was watching him. "How are you feeling about all of this?" He looked up. The morning light was coming through the kitchen window at a low angle, catching the dust on the glass, and he squinted slightly against it and then looked back at her with those unsettling green eyes that she'd spent 7 years half avoiding and said, "I'm not afraid of him." "I know," she said, and was startled to find that she meant it. "I want to understand it before it's in front of people. I want to understand every piece of it." He tapped the document. "He's going to say he did it for good reasons. He probably will. And maybe he thinks that's true." Harry's voice was absolutely level. "That doesn't mean any of it was his to take." Petunia thought about the letter in her coat pocket. "Trust that this is the only way." She thought about a man who had been trusted for so long that trust had become something he didn't ask for anymore, something he just assumed. "No," she said. "It doesn't." Harry nodded, and picked up Ragnarok's documents again, and began working through them in the grey October morning light, a 7-year-old who had learned to wake up watchful and was now, methodically, learning exactly what he was watching for. Down the street, a snowy owl was making its way to Privet Drive with a message from Hogwarts that would go, today, unanswered. And in his office at Hogwarts, behind the many portraits and the many silver instruments, behind the accumulated authority of decades, Albus Dumbledore sat very still and felt the chess piece move again, but this time it had moved without him, and in a direction he hadn't planned, and the particular cold that settled in his chest was not anger. It was something much more honest than that. It was surprise. Chapter 3, The Trial That Never Happened. The DMLE inquiry opened on a Thursday. Vane got the confirmation in the Morning Post and was at Privet Drive by 10 with the letter in one hand and a rolled-up copy of Magical Law Statutes under his arm that he'd clearly been reading on the way over. He spread the statutes on the kitchen table beside Harry's breakfast things and said, without preamble, "Bones moved fast. Faster than I expected." She opened a preliminary inquiry the same day she received the Gringotts complaint, not 5 days later. "Is that good?" Harry asked. "It means she found the evidence immediately compelling and didn't want to give anyone time to interfere with the process." Vane circled something in the statute. "The preliminary inquiry gives her authority to freeze the relevant accounts, subpoena ministry records, and compel testimony from anyone named in the complaint. That last part is the important one." Petunia was reading the letter over Vane's shoulder. "It says here she wants to meet with Harry." "With Harry and with you, yes. At the DMLE offices, not in a formal hearing room. She's being careful about optics. She doesn't want this to look like a child being put in front of a tribunal." "When?" Harry asked. "Next Wednesday." Harry looked at the calendar on the kitchen wall, one of Petunia's neat organizational habits, a month-per-page calendar with family appointments marked in different colors. October had a dentist appointment for Dudley and now, as of this moment, a pending meeting that would determine the legal shape of his future. "Okay," he said. "Between now and then," Vane said, "I want to continue your practical education. We had 2 sessions this week. I want 4 before Wednesday." He looked at Harry over the statutes. "How are you sleeping?" "Fine." "You're not nervous?" "I didn't say I wasn't nervous." Harry ate a spoonful of cereal. "I said I'm sleeping fine." Vane made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Right. 4 sessions. Today, tomorrow, Saturday, and Tuesday." Vane's office was on a street in Bloomsbury that had the quality of existing slightly sideways from the streets around it, the kind of place you could walk past 100 times without your eye catching the door. The door was plain dark wood with a brass number and no name. Inside was a single large room lined with shelves that held books, rolled documents, and a variety of objects Petunia categorized as probably not dangerous but couldn't be certain. There was a desk at one end and a clear working space at the other, with a faded rug and 2 chairs that were more comfortable than they looked. Harry felt the wards the moment he crossed the threshold. He stopped, just inside the door, and his head came up. "There are 7 distinct ward layers," Vane said, from behind him. "List what you can feel." Harry stood still for a moment. "Privacy ward, conversations in here can't be heard outside. Something on the windows. A detection ward near the door, like it knows who's come in. Something else near the bookshelves, I can't tell what that one does. And," he paused. "There's something on the floor under the rug. That one's old. The pattern in it is different from the others." Vane looked at the rug. He looked at Harry. "You got 5, he said. "No one's gotten that one under the rug except Ragnarok, and he was specifically looking for it." He picked up the corner of the rug, revealing a geometric pattern in the floorboards that had been there long enough to be part of the wood. "It's a bloodline ward. Left by the previous occupant. It prevents anyone from entering the space with hostile magical intent toward any resident Potter heir." Harry stared at it. "That's specific." "It is. Previous occupant worked with your family. Long time ago." Vane let the rug fall. "It activated when you walked in. That's why you felt it differently, it recognized you." "What are the other 2 wards I missed?" "A time confusion ward that makes anyone who doesn't know the address forget it approximately 3 minutes after leaving. And a ward against scrying, prevents magical observation of this space from outside." Vane went to the desk. "Sit down. We're starting with the Wizengamot structure." Harry sat. The next 2 hours were, by any external measure, a child sitting in a chair listening to an adult talk about political structures. Internally it was something else entirely. Vane had a way of teaching that was less instruction and more "here is a problem, tell me how you'd solve it with the information I just gave you," and Harry solved problems the way he did everything else, quickly, without showing off, with occasional questions that stopped Vane mid-sentence and required him to reconsider the order of what he was explaining. By the end of the first session Harry understood the voting structure of the Wizengamot, the distribution of hereditary versus appointed seats, and why the 2 Potter seats, combined, had the potential to shift the balance of 3 key standing committees. He also understood, because Vane explained it when Harry asked directly, what Sirius Black's name was doing in the estate records. "The estate records mention him?" Harry said. "He's named as your godfather in your parents' actual will, the real one, which Gringotts has a copy of that predates the forgeries. The real will name Sirius Black as your guardian in the event of your parents' death." Vane's voice was level. "He's currently in Azkaban." "For what?" "He was arrested 2 days after your parents died. He was charged with the murder of 12 Muggles and a wizard named Peter Pettigrew. He was not tried." Harry was still. "He wasn't tried. He's in prison and he wasn't tried. He was denied a trial." The relevant provision of magical law at the time allowed for summary imprisonment in cases deemed to involve sufficient evidence of guilt. The minister who approved the imprisonment was Bartemius Crouch Sr. "Who appointed him to that position?" Vane was quiet for half a second. "The Wizengamot, under the recommendation of Chief Warlock Dumbledore." The room was very quiet. Outside, London moved around the edges of the privacy ward, traffic and voices, the ordinary sounds of a city that knew nothing about any of this. "If the wills are forgeries," Harry said, "then the Real will establish Sirius Black as my legal guardian. And if he was imprisoned without a trial, which was possibly done specifically so he couldn't act as my guardian," he stopped. "How long has he been in Azkaban?" 6 years. Harry pressed his lips together. It was the first time since all of this began that Petunia saw something crack in the surface of his composure, not collapse, nothing dramatic, just a fracture, a visible moment of something raw. He was 7 years old and a man who was legally his family had spent 6 years in prison, possibly to keep him away from Harry, and a child's grief didn't care how many legal documents surrounded it. Vane gave him exactly 30 seconds. Not because he was cold, but because he understood, in the way that people who have seen real injustice understand, that what Harry needed was not comfort but direction. The fraud complaint Gringotts filed, he said, includes the Real will. When Bones opens the full inquiry, she'll find Sirius Black's name in it. The illegal imprisonment clause will be triggered. Harry looked up. His face was clear again, though his eyes were bright. She'll have to look at his case. She'll be obligated to. How do we make sure she does it quickly? We tell her, at the Wednesday meeting, directly and specifically, that you want it prioritized. I want it prioritized, Harry said, with the particular tone of someone who is not asking permission. Wednesday came with grey skies and the smell of coming rain. Petunia dressed Harry carefully, his own clothes, not Dudley's hand-me-downs, which she'd been quietly replacing over the past 2 weeks in a manner she hadn't drawn attention to. He wore dark trousers and a green jumper, because he was 7 and it was October and she was his aunt and that was what she could do right now. He looked at himself in the mirror without comment. The DMLE offices were in the Ministry of Magic, which was entered through a telephone box in Westminster and which made Petunia feel precisely as undignified as it sounds. Harry stepped into the atrium and looked at the fountain in the center, the ridiculous, slightly troubling statue of a witch and wizard surrounded by lesser beings looking admiringly upward, and said, to no one in particular, they're going to take that down eventually. A passing wizard in robes gave him an odd look. Harry didn't notice or didn't care. Vane navigated them through the security checks. Harry's name caused a ripple through the wand check witch, who took a beat too long looking at him before recovering herself, and up to the DMLE floor, which was busier and less decorated than the atrium. It had the quality of a place where actual work happened. People moved with purpose. There were fewer gilded things. Amelia Bones met them at the door of her office. She was a solid, direct-looking woman in her late 40s with short gray-streaked hair and a monocle that she wore without any apparent self-consciousness. She shook Vane's hand, then Petunia's, and then looked at Harry and said, Lord Potter. Thank you for coming in. She called him Lord Potter. Not young man, not son, not the diminishing variations Petunia had been waiting for. Lord Potter. Harry's chin came up by about half an inch. Thank you for moving quickly on the inquiry, he said. Bones smiled briefly. Come in. The office was practical, lined with filing cabinets and stacked folders, with a single window looking out over the ministry atrium below. She had them sit, Vane on one side, Harry and Petunia on the other, and opened a folder that Petunia recognized as Gringotts stationery. I've spent the last week reviewing the forensic reports and the associated documentation, Bones said. She spoke at a pace that assumed her audience was competent, which Petunia appreciated. The forgery evidence is unambiguous. 4 wills, all fraudulent. The proxy authorization chain built on those wills is therefore fraudulent in its entirety. That covers the Wizengamot votes and the estate management. She looked at Harry. The financial irregularities are substantial. I'm going to be frank with you, what we're looking at constitutes one of the most significant magical fraud cases in the ministry's recent history. Are you going to tell me who you think is responsible? Harry asked. Bones looked at him steadily. The documentary evidence points to one individual. I don't make accusations before an investigation is complete. But you're not surprised by what the evidence points to. A brief pause. No, she said. I'm not. Something in her face shifted slightly, not discomfort, but a kind of weight, the face of someone carrying knowledge they'd had for longer than they'd known what to do with. I want to ask you about Sirius Black. I was going to bring him up, Harry said. I know. His name is in the real will. He should have been recognized as your guardian 6 years ago, which means his imprisonment, which prevented him from acting in that capacity, requires review. She turned to a second folder. I pulled his arrest record. There is no trial transcript in his file because there was no trial. He was imprisoned on the direct authority of the Minister for Magic under wartime emergency provision, a provision which, I should note, was specifically limited to the duration of the war, which was declared over on the 2nd of November 1981. He was arrested on the 3rd, Vane said. Yes. Bones closed the folder. The wartime provision was legally inapplicable at the moment of his arrest. His imprisonment has no valid legal foundation. The room absorbed this. Get him out, Harry said. Bones looked at him. Lord Potter, he's been in Azkaban for 6 years for something he wasn't tried for, using a legal provision that didn't apply, while the man who should have gone to prison instead managed my family's assets. Harry's voice was quiet and absolutely definite. Get him out. Please. The please landed differently than the rest of it, not softening the demand, but contextualizing it. The manners of a child inside the steel of something older. Bones looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Vane, who said nothing, and then at Petunia, who also said nothing, because neither of them had anything to add. Then she picked up her quill and made a note on the top folder and said, I'll have an emergency review order signed by end of day. They were in the atrium, heading for the exit, when it happened. Petunia noticed the shift in sound first, the slight decrease in ambient conversation, the way the crowds moving around the fountain reorganized themselves without appearing to do so. She looked up. Albus Dumbledore was crossing the atrium from the direction of the lifts. He was wearing robes of deep blue, his half-moon spectacles bright in the atrium light, his silver hair and beard impeccable. He was alone. He was walking toward them with the unhurried, benign confidence of a man who had walked through every room he'd ever entered with the same absolute assurance that the room was glad he was there. He saw Harry at approximately the same moment Harry saw him. They stopped. Both of them, simultaneously, in the middle of the ministry atrium, the fountain burbling between them. Every other person in the general vicinity was managing very carefully not to look. Dumbledore smiled. It was a warm smile, the kind that had probably disarmed more people than any curse he'd ever cast. Harry, he said. I had hoped we might speak. Harry looked at him the way he looked at everything important, taking the full measure, no performance in it. I know who you are, he said. I know what you did. The smile didn't fall. It adjusted, became something slightly more complex, a sadness coming into it that might have been real. I'm sure you've been told a great deal. I would very much like the opportunity to explain. You forged my parents' wills, Harry said. His voice was clear and even. It carried, in the quiet of the atrium. Several people were definitely listening now without appearing to. You used them to make yourself my guardian without asking anyone, you used my family's money and my family's name to vote the way you wanted in the Wizengamot, and you put my godfather in prison without a trial so that he couldn't take care of me. He paused. I don't need an explanation. I need those things to stop, and they're stopping. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. His eyes, behind the half-moon spectacles, were the eyes of a man confronting something he'd chosen not to think about directly. You are very like your father, he said. You didn't know my father, Harry said. You knew what you wanted him to become. That's different. Whatever Dumbledore had prepared to say, and Petunia had no doubt there was a carefully prepared response in there, something wise-sounding and layered that would reframe the entire situation, he didn't say it. Something in Harry's face made him stop. Perhaps the complete absence of the deference he'd expected. Perhaps the clarity of the anger, which wasn't hot and wasn't frightened but was precise, the way a blade is precise. I think, Vane said, from 2 steps behind Harry, that any further conversation should go through Director Bones's office. As I'm sure you've been made aware, there is an active inquiry. Dumbledore looked at Vane. Then he looked at Harry once more. The sadness in his expression was real. Petunia was almost certain of it, which made her angrier rather than less. Genuine sorrow, felt by a man who had decided the people around him were pieces to be moved for their own good, meant very little to those people. I did what I believed was necessary to protect you, Dumbledore said to Harry, quietly. I want you to know that, whatever the inquiry finds. I know, Harry said. I also know it wasn't yours to decide. He turned and walked toward the exit, and Petunia and Vane fell into step beside him, and the atrium crowd, which had been holding its breath, very carefully exhaled. The first proper magical training session happened the following Saturday. Not law, not history, magic. Actual magic. Vane had cleared the center of his office. He'd moved the chairs to the walls and rolled the rug back, which meant the bloodline ward pattern in the floor was visible, its geometric lines catching the thin autumn light from the windows. Harry stood in the center of it. He'd been told he probably couldn't produce a clear spell without a wand, that wandless magic in a 7-year-old was vanishingly rare, that this first session was to establish a baseline. He'd listened to all of this politely and said nothing. Vane placed a single white candle on the floor 6 feet in front of Harry. Don't try to do anything specific, he said. Just look at it. Think about light. The candle being lit. Harry looked at the candle. He didn't close his eyes or wave his hands or do any of the things that might have indicated he was trying. He just looked at it. The candle lit. Not with the flicker of a struck match, it was as if it had always been lit and had just remembered. The flame was a clear, steady blue for exactly 2 seconds before it shifted to the normal orange-gold of a candle flame, and in those 2 seconds the temperature in the room went up by several degrees without any corresponding movement of air. Vane was very still. Blue? Harry said. You know what color it was? I could see it from here. No, I mean, do you know what blue wandless flame means, in terms of magical classification? Harry looked at him. No. Tell me. It means the magical output is operating above the standard classification range for an adult wizard with a wand. Vane's voice was very careful. It means whatever is in you, and something clearly is, it isn't drawing on standard magical sources the way normal magic does. Is it dangerous? Not inherently. But it's significant. Vane crouched down and looked at the candle, which was now burning ordinary orange. Harry. Has anything happened before? Not in a training context, in your daily life. Things you didn't intend. Harry was quiet for a moment. Petunia, from the chair at the edge of the room, watched him decide whether to say something, and then say it. The teacher at school, he said. Last year. She was, he stopped and reorganized. She said something in front of the class. About me. Something unkind. And I wasn't angry exactly, I was, he paused, choosing. Certain. Certain that what she'd said was wrong and that I was going to do well on the test anyway. And I did. Better than anyone. And afterwards her marking seemed to get worse. She made mistakes. Small ones. For about a month. He looked at Vane. Was that me? It's possible, Vane said. Intent without direction. Your magic responded to a certainty and produced a consequence. He looked at the candle again. Do you feel it? Right now, can you feel your magic? Harry put a hand out, palm up. Not requesting anything. Just as if he was checking the air. Yes, he said. It feels like, it's always felt like something's waiting. He lowered his hand. Like the ward boundary in the alley felt. Like pressure. That pressure is going to need training, Vane said. Real training, and a lot of it. Because what you have is not a standard magical gift that Hogwarts was designed to handle, and if you walk into that school in 4 years without any framework for it, we're going to have a problem. Then we'll train, Harry said. Simple. Declarative. The way he said everything. Vane stood up. He went to the bookshelf and pulled down something old, spine-cracked and thick, that he set on the desk with a deliberate thud. Right then. From the beginning. Theory first. 3 days later, Sirius Black was moved out of his cell in Azkaban. Vane called Petunia on a Tuesday evening. His voice was level in the way it got when he was covering something that was not a small thing. The emergency review order was signed this morning. They did the transfer tonight, he's at St. Mungo's. Mandatory medical evaluation. He's alive. A pause that said more than the pause's length suggested. He's been there for 6 years. He's not. Another pause. He'll need time. Petunia sat down. Does Harry know? Not yet. I thought you should tell him. She went upstairs. Harry was reading by the light of his bedside lamp, one of her books, she noticed, a history she'd had since university. She sat on the edge of his bed and told him Sirius Black was out of Azkaban. She told him he was at St. Mungo's. She told him he was alive. Harry put the book down. He looked at the ceiling. His jaw worked once. Can I see him? He asked. When he's recovered enough. How long will that take? I don't know. She looked at him. Harry. He's going to be. What happened to him in there? I know what Azkaban is, Harry said. His voice had gone very quiet. Vane told me. It destroys people. He was looking at the ceiling with green eyes that had gone very bright. He was in there for 6 years for something he didn't do, and I was here. You were 1 year old. You couldn't, I know. He wasn't arguing with her. He was just saying what it was. I know I was 1 year old. I know that's not the same thing as being responsible for it. He looked at her. But I'm not 1 year old now. And now I know. Petunia sat with that for a moment. Then she said something she hadn't planned, which was, your mother would be very angry about all of this. Harry looked at her, startled, not by the words but by the she in them. Petunia almost never spoke about Lily. She was aware of it. She'd maintained the avoidance for 7 years. Harry knew almost nothing about his mother from her, and they both knew it, and the gap it left had been filled with silence. What was she like? Harry asked. His voice had changed completely. He was 7 again, purely 7, a child asking about his dead mother in the lamplight of his small bedroom. Petunia was not prepared. She was categorically not prepared for this conversation tonight, of all nights, in the aftermath of Sirius Black's release and the active DMLE inquiry and the encounter with Dumbledore in the Ministry atrium. She had managed to not have this conversation for 7 years. Petunia began, and stopped. Started again. She felt things at full volume. Happy at full volume. Angry at full volume. She never did anything in half measures. She stopped again. The words were strange in her mouth, not because they were false but because they were true, and the truth of them, after so long being kept behind glass, felt almost violent. She would have hated this. All of it. Someone using her son. She paused. She was not patient about injustice. Harry was looking at her with an expression she'd never seen on him before. All the composure, all the watchful management had gone out of his face and he just looked, young. Like he'd been hungry for this for a long time. Tell me something else, he said. Petunia stayed until the lamp went out. Chapter 4, The Man Who Walked Out of Azkaban St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries was on Oxford Street, disguised as a shop selling occult supplies that no one ever seemed to go in or out of. Petunia had walked past it, she calculated, perhaps 30 times in her adult life and never known. This was becoming a pattern, the magical world, sitting in the gaps of the ordinary one, watching her not notice it. Vane had arranged the visit for a Saturday in early November, 3 weeks after Sirius's transfer from Azkaban. The healers had said he was physically stable and mentally. They had used the word processing, which Petunia recognized as medical language, for we don't have a better word for what this is. He'd asked to see Harry. Specifically, first. Before Vane, before paperwork, before the legal team currently assembling around his case like a careful scaffolding. Harry first. Harry had been ready at 7 in the morning, which was an hour before they needed to leave. He sat at the kitchen table and ate breakfast without tasting it and didn't mention being nervous, which meant he was nervous, which Petunia had learned to read in the particular quality of his stillness. He'd been doing wandless exercises every morning since the training session started, small things, controlled things, the blue flame business carefully channeled into precise small actions under Vane's instruction, and this morning he hadn't done them. He'd just sat. "You don't have to have any particular kind of reunion," Petunia said. She was standing at the counter. "There's no correct way this is supposed to go." Harry looked at her. "I know. I'm saying you don't need to perform anything. You don't need to be, Aunt Petunia." He said it not unkindly. "I know." She stopped talking. He was right. She was managing him again, the old reflex, filing off the edges of situations in advance so nothing got too jagged. She turned back to the counter. "Thank you," he said, quietly, to her back. The occult shop front opened into a lobby of pale green tile and purposeful movement, healers in lime green robes, visitors with the slightly dazed quality of people in hospitals everywhere, a directory on the wall listing wards by ailment category. Petunia read spell damage and creature-induced injuries and magical psychological trauma without comment. The magical psychological trauma ward was on the 4th floor. The healer who met them at the ward entrance was young and precise and spoke about Sirius Black the way medical professionals speak about cases when they're managing their own feelings about those cases, carefully, with the lid very firmly on. "He's been responding well to treatment," she said. "The primary effects of prolonged Dementor exposure, the memory suppression, the chronic despair, are being addressed. He has good days and more difficult days. Today appears to be a good one." She looked at Harry. "He's aware you're coming." "He's been," she paused, recalibrated. "He's been very much looking forward to it." Harry nodded. He was doing the composed thing. Petunia could see the effort it was taking, which was itself unusual. Normally his composure was effortless, a habit so deep it didn't cost anything. Today it cost something. "Can I go in alone?" he asked. Petunia looked at Vane. Vane looked at the healer. The healer said, "I'd recommend a short visit to begin, and we'll be just outside." "That's fine," Harry said. "I just want to go in alone." He knocked on the door before he opened it, which struck Petunia as an act of consideration beyond his years, giving the man inside time to prepare, and then he went in and pulled it closed behind him. Petunia stood in the corridor and looked at the pale green wall and did not think about Lily, because if she started thinking about Lily right now she would not stop. Vane stood beside her. After a moment he said, "He's going to be all right." "I know he is," Petunia said. "That's not what I'm thinking about." Vane was quiet, which was one of the things she'd come to appreciate about him. Inside the room, Harry stopped 2 steps from the door. Sirius Black was sitting in a chair by the window. He was thin in a way that had a specific quality to it, not the thinness of someone who hadn't eaten, though that too, but the thinness of someone from whom something had been taken that hadn't finished being taken back. His dark hair was long and unwashed, beginning to improve from whatever state it had been in when he'd arrived. He had gray eyes that were currently fixed on Harry with an intensity that was trying very hard to be something manageable. He looked like someone who'd been underwater for 6 years and had only just remembered what air tasted like. "Hi," Harry said. Sirius Black made a sound that was not quite a word. He put one hand over his mouth and looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at Harry. "You're so big," he said. His voice was rough, the voice of someone who hadn't used it for regular conversation in years. I last saw you when you were," he stopped. 1 year old, Harry said. "I know. I don't remember it. You look like James." Sirius's voice cracked slightly on the name. "You've got his face. Except the eyes, those are my mum's. People keep telling me that too." Harry moved to the chair beside Sirius and sat down, which closed the distance without making an event of it. Up close, he could see the damage more clearly, the gray in Sirius's skin that wasn't natural coloring but the remnant of something, the shadows under his eyes, the slight involuntary shaking in his left hand that Sirius controlled by resting it on his knee. Harry looked at all of it without looking away. "I know what happened," Harry said. Vane explained it. "The wills, the imprisonment, all of it." Sirius looked at him. "Who's Vane?" "The cursebreaker my aunt hired. He figured out the whole thing." Harry paused. "He's good. You can trust him." "Your aunt?" Sirius processed this. "Lily's sister. Petunia. She's outside." Something crossed Sirius's face, surprise, and something more complicated beneath it. "She hired someone?" "She found the original letter. The one Dumbledore left when he dropped me off. She read it again and she got angry." Harry's voice was precise. "It took her 7 years to get angry. But when she did, she really did." Sirius looked at him for a long moment. You're not what I expected a 7-year-old to be." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Something. I spent 6 years thinking about you in there, when I could think at all. Imagining you." His voice was very raw. "I was supposed to take care of you. James and Lily," he stopped, swallowed. "They trusted me. I was supposed to be there and I wasn't and then I was." His hand tightened on his knee. "I'm sorry." "Don't," Harry said. Not unkindly. Not dismissively. Just, definite. You were put there. You didn't leave. There's a difference." Sirius looked at him with those gray eyes that had too much in them. "I know what being put somewhere feels like," Harry said quietly. "I know what it feels like to be in a place because someone decided it was convenient and called it something else. I know the difference between that and choosing." He met Sirius's eyes. "You didn't choose." Sirius Black put his free hand over his face. His shoulders moved once. Harry sat next to him and didn't say anything and didn't look away, and outside in the corridor Petunia stood against the pale green wall and held herself together with the same precise effort she had been using for 30 years. They stayed for 2 hours. The second hour was easier than the first. Sirius talked about James, haltingly at first and then with gathering momentum, the way a person talks who has been carrying stories alone for too long and is relieved beyond articulation to have somewhere to put them. Harry listened with the focused absorption he gave everything that mattered, and asked questions that were sometimes the questions of a curious child and sometimes the questions of someone building a complete picture. What was he like? What did he find funny? Did he ever back down from anything? Did he and Lily fight? Constantly, Sirius said. For years. Lily could not stand him when they were young. He showed off. He needed everyone to see he was brilliant, which he was, but he needed them to see it, and Lily had no patience for that. He almost smiled, the first real attempt at a smile Harry had seen from him. She told him so, directly, several times. Loudly. When did they stop fighting? Harry asked. When he stopped needing to show her. When he just was. Sirius looked out the window. The autumn sky outside was the color of old pewter. He grew up. Took a while. But when he did, he was a pause, genuine grief coming through the smile. He was the best person I knew. Harry was quiet for a moment. Was Dumbledore someone they trusted? The shift in Sirius was subtle. The openness that had been building over the last hour reorganized itself slightly. He was someone everyone trusted, he said carefully. He's Dumbledore. That's what he is. The thing people trust. But specifically, did James and Lily trust him? Sirius looked at him. Yes. And no. He said it slowly, like he was examining the truth of it as he spoke it. He was running the Order, the group that was fighting Voldemort. They were part of it. They trusted his strategy. They trusted that he knew more than they did about the war. He paused. But in the last months, before they died, James was worried about something. He didn't tell me what. He said Dumbledore had suggested they go into hiding, under a Fidelius charm, and that had made sense. But there was something else. Something James had found that bothered him. He stopped. I don't know what it was. He died before he told me. Harry filed this away. Okay. You're thinking about something, Sirius said. I'm thinking Vane needs to know that. Harry looked at him. When you're better, when you're out of here, will you work with him? With us? Sirius looked at him for a long moment, this small boy with James's face and Lily's eyes, who was 7 years old and managing an estate fraud case and a DMLE inquiry and a confrontation with Albus Dumbledore as if these were simply things that needed doing. He looked at him, and something that had been broken in a cell in Azkaban for 6 years remembered what it was supposed to feel like. Yeah, Sirius said. His voice was rough but steady. Yeah, I will. Petunia was called in for the last 20 minutes of the visit. She stood in the doorway of the hospital room and looked at Sirius Black, and Sirius Black looked at her, and the air between them had the particular charge of two people carrying different and equally heavy things about the same dead woman. Mrs. Dursley, Sirius said. Mr. Black. She came in. She sat in the chair on the other side of him because Harry was already in the other one. She looked at the state of him, and something in her face did what it did at the kitchen table when Harry had looked up from his cereal that first morning after Vane came, a complicated, unwilling, genuine human response. Thank you, Sirius said. For, Harry told me. What you did. I was 7 years late, Petunia said. You did it. He looked at her steadily. That's not nothing. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he's going to need, she stopped and started again. He needs someone who knew James and Lily. As people. Not as symbols. I know. I can tell him about Lily. Some of it. I didn't know James. She said this without apology, just cataloging the limits of what she could provide. But I didn't know the world they lived in and I can't, she stopped again. This was not easy. She was not accustomed to enumerating her limitations aloud. I can't give him what you can. Petunia, Sirius said, quietly, and she stiffened slightly at the use of her first name because they had not established that, and then he said, what you did, going out there and finding someone and fighting for him, James would have. He stopped. He looked out the window. He would have been very surprised, he said carefully, and very grateful. Petunia looked at the window too. Lily would have been smug about it, she said. It surprised a real laugh out of Sirius Black, cracked and rough but real, the laugh of someone who had forgotten they were capable of it. Harry looked between them. Something in him settled, some tension that had been there since morning, coiled beneath the composure, quietly released. November moved with purpose. The DMLE inquiry progressed through its stages with the efficient momentum of a process that had good evidence behind it. Bones's office issued subpoenas for ministry records going back to 1981. The ministry notary who had authenticated the proxy documents, a man named Aubrey Fitch, who had been a junior clerk at the time and was now a mid-level functionary in the Department of Magical Cooperation, was summoned for questioning. He had, according to Vane, the specific look of a man who had been waiting for this summons for years and had mixed feelings about it finally arriving. Meanwhile, Sirius was released from St. Mungo's on the 16th of November with a clean bill of physical health and the kind of psychological evaluation that came with several caveats. He walked out of the hospital in borrowed robes that didn't quite fit, with Harry and Petunia on one side and Vane on the other, and stopped on the pavement outside to look up at the sky for a moment, just the sky, ordinary London grey, with an expression that Petunia thought she would probably never forget. Then he looked down at Harry and said, "Where are we going?" Vane had secured him a furnished flat in Bloomsbury, near the office, which was practical and private and warded. Sirius looked around it and pronounced it acceptable, which Petunia interpreted as the response of a man for whom any room with a lockable door from the inside qualified as acceptable after 6 years of a cage. "I need a wand," Sirius said. "Ollivanders, tomorrow," Vane said. "Your original wand is in ministry storage. We'll have it returned, but the legal process takes time. A new one will do." He sat down on the couch in the furnished flat. He was getting better, the shaking in his left hand was mostly gone, the grey quality of his skin was fading toward something more like human. But he still had the look of a man who hadn't quite caught up with the fact that the world had kept going without him. "Tell me where we are," he said to Vane. "All of it." Vane told him. All of it, the wills, the proxy authority, the Wizengamot seats, the financial records, the Fitch subpoena, the DMLE inquiry. Sirius listened without interrupting until Vane finished, and then he said, "When does he find out the full shape of the evidence against him?" "He knows the complaint has been filed," Vane said. "He doesn't yet know the specific contents of the forensic reports. Those are under inquiry confidentiality until Bones's office finalizes." "He'll be building a defense," Sirius said. "Not speculating, stating. He always has one. He thinks 3 moves ahead, always has. He won't panic. He'll be deciding which version of the story is the most defensible." "What version would you expect?" Harry asked. Sirius looked at him. "The true one," he said. "That's what makes him dangerous. He'll tell the exact truth about what he did and why, and every word of it will be accurate, and the argument will be that his reasons were good enough to justify all of it." He looked at the middle distance. "He'll say Voldemort could come back. He'll say the prophecy required you to be prepared in a specific way. He'll say the money and the seats were managed in your best interests. He'll say I was a liability," his jaw tightened. "He'll say my presence in your life was a risk and that my removal was a protective measure." The room was quiet. "He might even believe it," Harry said. "He definitely believes it," Sirius said. "That's the whole problem. He's not evil, he stopped, choosing. He decided, somewhere along the way, that he was the only person who could see the whole board. And once you decide that, once you really believe it, then everyone else is just a piece you're responsible for. You stop asking what they want. You just move them." Harry was looking at the floor. "Did my parents know about the prophecy?" "Yes," Sirius said. "Dumbledore told them." He paused. "He told them there was a child born at the end of July who would have the power to defeat Voldemort. He didn't tell them, I think, everything he knew about what that would require. I think he gave them the information he thought was useful and kept the rest." "That's still true," Harry said. "He told them what he decided they needed to know." "Yes." Harry looked up. "What did the prophecy say exactly?" Sirius looked at Vane, who said, "It's in the Hall of Prophecy at the Ministry. Under lock. We can request access as part of the inquiry, it's material to the case." "Add it to the list," Harry said. Then, to Sirius, "When you're ready to work, when you feel ready, I want your read on everything. Not what Vane thinks, not what Bones thinks. Yours. You knew Dumbledore before all of this. You knew how he thought. Sirius looked at him for a moment. "You're going to face him yourself, aren't you?" "At the inquiry." "At the Wizengamot session," Harry said. "When he answers for it." "Yes. He'll try to, he's very good at making people feel small," Sirius said. It wasn't a warning exactly, more an observation he felt obligated to make. "He doesn't do it cruelly. He does it gently, which is worse." Harry met his eyes. "I'm aware," he said. Sirius looked at this boy, this child, 7 years old with a mind like a precision instrument and something in him that lit candles in blue and felt ward boundaries without training, and felt James in him, and felt Lily in him, and felt something else that was purely Harry and had been forged in a cupboard under the stairs and in a garden pulling weeds and in a goblin bank and a hospital room and a ministry atrium, and it was not fragile. Not in any way that Dumbledore's gentleness could reach. "Okay," Sirius said. "Okay." The Wizengamot session was announced on the last Thursday of November. Bones's office sent the formal notification. A session of the full Wizengamot had been called to address the findings of the DMLE preliminary inquiry. The date was set for the 17th of December. The session would be presided over by the Deputy Chief Warlock. Dumbledore, who was named in the inquiry, would be present as a respondent, not a presider. Harry read the notification at Vane's office, standing at the desk, and set it down without visible reaction. 6 weeks, he said. 5 weeks and 4 days, Vane said. Which is enough time to prepare. I want to claim my seats before the session, Harry said. I want to be sitting in them when it starts. You're 7, Vane said. The minimum age for active Wizengamot participation is, I know what the minimum age is, Harry said. Is there a provision for a minor heir to attend a session in which their estate is the subject of the inquiry? Vane was quiet for half a second. Yes, he said. There is. Then I attend in that capacity. And I claim the seats in the record before the session opens, so that my name is in the membership roll. He looked at Vane. Not proxy. Not represented by someone else. My name. Vane picked up his notepad. I'll draft the petition. Sirius should take his seat too, Harry said. His name is cleared. His case was resolved. He's Lord Black, he has a hereditary seat. He does. Then we go in together. Sirius, who was in the armchair at the edge of the room with a mug of tea and 3 weeks of recovered health behind him and a new wand, 11 inches, ebony, dragon heartstring, which he had described as better than the original, actually, looked up. He'd been listening without appearing to, which was something he and Harry shared. You want to walk in together? You and me? Yes. Harry's voice was level. I want him to see that you're out, you're seated, and you're beside me. All of that at once. Before anything is said. Sirius set down his mug. His gray eyes, which had been clearing by degrees over the past weeks, sharpened fully. Not the eyes of a man still finding his way back. The eyes of a man who had found it. Then that's what we do. The weeks before the 17th of December were the most intensely educational of Harry's life. Vane had shifted the sessions to every day, sometimes twice. They covered the Wizengamot procedural rules, the specific charges in the inquiry, the forensic evidence and how it would be presented, the likely line of Dumbledore's defense, the political dynamics of the chamber, who was likely to be sympathetic, who owed Dumbledore, who owed nobody. Harry absorbed all of it with the same precision he brought to wandless magic, which was itself progressing at a rate that made Vane periodically put down whatever he was explaining and stare at the space Harry had just done something in. A week before the session, Harry extinguished the candle from 6 feet away with a breath of cold air that frosted the window beside it. Vane stood at the other end of the room and said, with the tone of a man carefully managing his response to something, that's a 5th-year OWL level temperature manipulation, done wandlessly, by a 7-year-old. Is it getting better or worse? Harry asked. It's getting more precise. That's more concerning than better or worse. Vane picked up his notepad. Your control is exceptional. The output is still above classification range, but you're directing it now instead of just producing it. He looked at Harry. At Hogwarts they're going to notice. Good, Harry said. That's a very calm response to what I'm describing. I'm not going to hide it, Harry said. Why would I hide it? It's mine. He looked at the candle, which was still unlit. He lit it with a thought, orange this time, completely controlled. What would hiding it accomplish? It would just mean I'd gone to all this effort to know who I am and what I have and then acted like I didn't. Vane looked at him for a moment. No, he said. You're right. I shouldn't have implied you should. You didn't imply it, Harry said. You just said they'd notice. I'm saying that's fine. He turned back to the desk. What's next? The night before the session, Petunia came to say goodnight to Harry and found him not in bed but at his desk, the Ragnarok document spread around him in a careful configuration, the evidence copies organized by date. He wasn't reading them. He'd read them so many times he knew them. He was just sitting with them, in the way of someone who had worked very hard toward a specific moment and was now in the strange, still space before it. Come to bed, Petunia said. In a minute. She stood in the doorway. He didn't look like a child getting ready for something difficult. He looked like someone who had already decided the outcome, not in the arrogant way, but in the way of a person who has done the work and has nothing left to do but show up. Are you afraid of him? She asked. She didn't need to specify who. Harry thought about it properly, not the quick deflection he sometimes used. No, he said. I think I feel sorry for him. Slightly. Why? Because he's going to have to sit in that room and look at what he did and try to explain it, and the explanation is going to be true, everything Sirius said, it'll all be true, the reasons, the good intentions, and it still won't be enough. He looked at the documents. That must be a terrible place to be. To have done everything you thought was right and have it still be wrong. Petunia stood in his doorway and looked at her nephew and thought, not for the first time and not for the last, that Lily was very present in this boy in ways that had nothing to do with the eyes. Come to bed, she said again, more gently. He came. December the 17th arrived cold and clear, a hard frost morning with a sky like new steel. Harry dressed in the clothes Petunia had bought, proper robes, dark green with silver edging, a lord's formal attire that Vane had specified and Petunia had acquired without comment, and stood in the bathroom mirror and looked at himself. He looked older than 7. He had for a while. Something about the eyes. He came downstairs. Sirius was already there, in the kitchen, in the new robes that actually fit, talking to Petunia in a low voice about something that stopped when Harry came in. They both looked at him. Sirius's expression did the thing it sometimes did, the involuntary James Lily double-take, and then settled into something steady and present. Ready? Sirius asked. Yes, Harry said. Petunia made them eat breakfast first, which was non-negotiable. They ate. Vane arrived at 8 sharp with the legal documentation, the formal petition, the evidence binders, the seating certification, in a leather case that looked like it had been to worse places than a Wizengamot session. He looked at Harry and Sirius together, in their robes, at the kitchen table, and said nothing for a moment. Right, he said. Let's go. Petunia stood at the front door and watched them walk to the car, Sirius and Harry side by side, Vane slightly ahead, the morning frost bright on the pavement. She had not been permitted to attend. The Wizengamot session was closed to Muggles by charter rule. She had argued about this with Vane for 3 days and then stopped arguing because she'd recognized she was managing the situation, and what she was actually managing was her own fear. Harry turned at the car and looked back at her. He raised one hand. Not a wave, just an acknowledgement. I see you. I know you're there. She raised hers in return. Then they got in the car, and the car pulled away, and she stood in the doorway of number 4 Privet Drive and felt the November cold on her face and thought about a letter that had lived in her coat pocket for 7 years, and about a baby on a doorstep, and about a woman who had felt things at full volume, and about what it felt like to finally, past due and imperfect and absolutely certain, do the right thing. She went inside and put the kettle on. She would wait. She was good at waiting. Today, for the first time, the waiting felt different. Today she was waiting for news of something she'd started. Chapter 5, The Forger's Confession. The Wizengamot chamber was older than the ministry building it sat beneath. That was the first thing Harry noticed, the way the stone of the walls didn't match the stone of the corridor they'd walked down to get here, as if the chamber had been built first and everything else had been constructed around it over the subsequent centuries, like a river that shaped the land through which it ran. The benches arranged in tiered semicircles were dark with age and use. The air had the particular quality of a space where serious things had happened for a very long time. They arrived early, which was intentional. Vane had timed everything. They needed to be seated and established before the general membership arrived, not filtering in with the crowd. Harry walked in with Sirius beside him and Vane a half step behind, and the clerk at the chamber entrance looked at the seating petition, looked at Harry, looked at his list, looked at Harry again. "Lord Potter," he said. "Lord Peveril." He wrote both names in the membership roll with the slightly mechanical efficiency of a man who had been doing this job long enough that the extraordinary occasionally caught him off guard, and he handled it by proceeding correctly. "And Lord Black." He wrote Sirius's name. "The Potter and Peveril seats are in the second tier, positions 14 and 15. The Black seat is first tier, position 7. "I'd like the Black seat adjacent to the Potter seats," Sirius said. "For this session." The clerk looked at his seating chart. He made a note. "I'll arrange that." They walked to the second tier. Harry sat in his seat, seat 14, the Potter seat, which had a small carved crest on the back that he ran his fingers over once without looking at it, and looked at the chamber. It was beginning to fill. Witches and wizards in formal robes taking their places, conversations in low voices, the ambient sound of an institution with a long memory and complicated feelings about being reminded of it. Several people noticed Harry and Sirius immediately. Several more noticed a moment later. The noticing moved through the chamber like a current. Harry met no one's eyes in particular. He simply sat, in his robes, in his seat, and looked at the chamber the way he'd been looking at everything since October, with the full focused attention of someone who intended to understand it completely. Sirius settled into the seat to Harry's left. He looked like himself, finally, or like what himself was reconstructing into. The gray was gone from his skin, his posture had the easy authority of someone who'd grown up expecting to occupy spaces like this. He was 31 years old and he'd been in Azkaban for 6 years, and he sat in that chamber like he'd been sitting in it his whole life, which was its own kind of defiance. "He's not here yet," Sirius said quietly. "He'll come last," Harry said. "He always has." He was right. The chamber filled over the following 20 minutes. Amelia Bones took her seat in the observers' gallery, not the membership benches. The DMLE had a designated position for active inquiries, slightly elevated, with a clear view of both the respondent's position and the presiding bench. She looked at Harry when she came in, a brief direct look, and then at the documentation on her desk. The Deputy Chief Warlock, a small, precise woman named Griselda Marchbanks, who was approximately 100 years old and appeared to regard everyone in the chamber, regardless of age or title, with the same mildly impatient attention, took the presiding position and called for quiet with a single tap of her wand on the stone bench. The chamber quieted immediately. She had that kind of presence. Then Dumbledore came in. He came through the main entrance, alone, without the ceremony that might have accompanied him under different circumstances, no assistant, no entourage, just Albus Dumbledore in robes of deep burgundy, his silver hair catching the chamber light, his expression carrying that quality it always had of benign and absolute composure. He looked like a man attending an important meeting, not a man who had been summoned to account for fraud. He walked to the respondent's position, a separate seat, slightly below the main floor level, placed so that the respondent addressed the chamber from a position that was technically lower than the membership benches. It was a deliberate architectural choice, Harry had read. A tradition going back centuries. Dumbledore sat. He looked at the chamber. His eyes swept the tiered benches in the practiced way of someone reading a room, and they found Harry, and they stopped. Harry looked back. He didn't perform anything. He didn't harden his expression or lift his chin or do any of the things that would have announced he was aware of the significance of the moment. He just looked, the way he always looked, clear and present and absolutely not moving. Dumbledore held the look for 3 seconds. Then he moved his gaze on, and Marchbanks said, "We are convened," and the session began. The formal presentation of findings took 40 minutes. Bones presented the case from her position in the observer's gallery with the direct, unhurried competence of someone who had been building toward this and was not going to waste it. The 4 forged wills. The proxy authorization chain. The Gringotts forensic reports. The transaction records. The Wizengamot voting record showing every motion on which the Potter proxy votes had been cast. The imprisonment of Sirius Black under an inapplicable wartime provision, cross-referenced with the real will naming Black as legal guardian. She laid it out like the professional she was, not with anger, not with theater, just with the particular relentlessness of well-organized evidence. The chamber listened. Some of them were hearing this for the first time and their faces showed it. Others were not hearing it for the first time, and their faces showed that too, which was more interesting. When she finished, Marchbanks said, "The respondent may address the findings." Dumbledore stood. He didn't look at his notes. He didn't have notes. He stood in the respondent's position and looked at the chamber with the expression of a man who was about to tell the truth, and the truth was going to be more complicated than the evidence. "Everything that Director Bones has presented is accurate," he said. His voice was calm and carried easily through the chamber. The documents were forged. The proxy authority was established without consent. The funds were redirected. Sirius Black was imprisoned on my recommendation. All of these things happened, and I was responsible for them. The chamber was very still. "The question before this body," Dumbledore continued, "is not whether these things happened, but whether they were done out of malice or out of necessity. I would ask you to consider the context in which they were done." He paused. In November of 1981, we had just survived a war. Not the end of a war. I will be clear that I have never believed we survived anything more than an interruption. Voldemort was not destroyed. He was diminished. And the single most important factor in the eventual resolution of that conflict, to the extent it will be resolved, is the boy who sits in seat 14 of this chamber. Several heads turned toward Harry. Harry did not react. "I made decisions in the hours after James and Lily Potter's deaths," Dumbledore said. "I made them quickly, and I made them alone, and I made them with the information I had, which included the content of a prophecy that concerns Harry Potter's role in ending Voldemort's threat permanently. I made those decisions because I believed, I continue to believe, that ensuring Harry's survival and eventual preparedness required a degree of management that his circumstances did not naturally provide." "Management," said Sirius, from the second tier. He said it quietly but clearly. The word fell into the chamber like something dropped from a height. Marchbanks looked at him. "Lord Black." "My apologies," Sirius said. He didn't sound particularly apologetic. Dumbledore looked at Sirius. Something moved in his face, genuine grief, Harry thought, not performed. "Sirius," he said. "What was done to you was necessary." Sirius said. "Is that the word you're going to use?" "No," Dumbledore said. "What was done to you was wrong. I recommended your imprisonment because I believed you were the secret keeper and therefore responsible for the deaths of James and Lily. I learned later that I was wrong. I did not act on that information quickly enough, and the delay." He stopped. He looked, briefly, like a man carrying something very heavy. The delay was unconscionable. I have no defense for that specific failure that I would ask this body to accept. The chamber absorbed this. People were looking at each other with the particular expressions of people watching something they hadn't expected. Harry stood up. Every eye in the chamber moved to him. Marchbanks looked at him. She raised an eyebrow, which on her face constituted an inquiry. "May I address the respondent directly?" Harry asked. Marchbanks looked at Dumbledore. Looked at Harry. "You have standing to speak," she said. "The floor is yours, Lord Potter." Harry stepped out from behind his bench and stood at the edge of the second tier. He was 7 years old in robes that fit him, in a chamber that was older than the country as it was currently organized, holding his ground with the complete physical ease of someone who understood precisely where they stood. "You said you believed Voldemort wasn't destroyed," Harry said. "You said the most important factor in ending the conflict is me. I want to understand what that means practically. What were you preparing me for?" Dumbledore looked at him. "That is a conversation I had hoped to have with you when you were older. I'm having it now." A pause. "Then, there is a prophecy in the Hall of Prophecy that states that the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord will be born at the end of July, to those who have thrice defied him. That child will mark him as his equal. And neither can live while the other survives." He said it quietly, in the chamber, in front of 73 witches and wizards who had not all heard it before. "You were born on the 31st of July. Your parents defied him 3 times. He chose you as the subject of the prophecy when he went to Godric's Hollow." He looked at Harry. "The prophecy indicates that ultimately, there will be a final confrontation between you and what remains of Voldemort. I have spent 20 years preparing for that eventuality." "Preparing me specifically," Harry said. "Yes. By making sure I had no knowledge of my family, my inheritance, or my rights. By making sure the one adult who was legally entitled to be my guardian was in a cell. By placing me with my aunt's family and ensuring I was," he paused, choosing the word, "managed. Kept small. Kept unaware." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "What kind of preparation is that?" Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The chamber was absolutely silent. "I believed a childhood removed from the magical world would allow you to develop without the pressure of your reputation. Without the burden of what your name means. You believed," Harry said, "that you could decide what I needed better than I could. Better than anyone who actually knew me." He paused. "You were right about one thing. I was born to have a role in ending this conflict. That is apparently true. But the preparation you chose, keeping me ignorant, keeping me isolated, keeping me dependent on arriving at Hogwarts knowing nothing and having nothing, that's not preparation. That's control. And the difference between those two things is whether the person being prepared gets any say in it." Dumbledore looked at him. In his expression was something Harry hadn't expected to find there, not defensiveness, not the well-constructed arguments of a man protecting his position. Something genuine and complicated and, at its bottom, tired. "You are right," Dumbledore said. "In that specific distinction, you are entirely right." The chamber exhaled. "That doesn't change what was done," Harry said. "But I wanted to say it clearly, so the record is clear. This wasn't about my safety. It was about your certainty that you knew best. And the cost of that certainty was my parents' real wills ignored, my godfather in a cell, my family's name used without permission, and my first 7 years spent not knowing any of this existed." He looked at the chamber. "That is what happened. Those are the specific consequences of one man deciding he saw the whole board and everyone else was a piece on it." He sat back down. No one spoke for almost 10 seconds. Then Marchbanks said, "We'll take a recess." The recess lasted 20 minutes, which was long enough for Aubrey Fitch to be brought in. He'd been waiting in an anteroom. Bones had arranged it with Vane the previous week, Fitch's testimony was to be delivered in session, not just in the preliminary inquiry, because what he had to say went beyond the documentation. He came in with the look of a man who had made a decision about something and was committed to it even though it frightened him. He was mid-40s, balding, with the soft hands of a career administrator. He sat in the testimony seat, a separate position from the respondents, a witness chair, placed near the presider's bench, and looked at Marchbanks. "Mr. Fitch," Marchbanks said, "you have agreed to provide testimony under veritaserum regarding your role in the authentication of the documents in question. You have waived your right to legal representation for this testimony. Do you confirm that this is your decision, made freely?" "Yes," Fitch said. He looked at his hands. "Yes. I've wanted to say this for a long time." The veritaserum was administered by a healer from St. Mungo's, a standard 3 drops, clear as water, with a 2-minute waiting period. Fitch's face slackened slightly as it took effect, the micro-expressions of conscious self-management smoothing out. Marchbanks nodded to Bones. "Mr. Fitch," Bones said. "In November 1981, you were employed as a notary in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And during that period, you authenticated documents establishing Albus Dumbledore as the legal magical guardian of Harry James Potter, along with documents establishing proxy authority over the Potter family estate and Wizengamot seats. Is that correct?" "Yes." "Were those documents genuine?" "No." "Who instructed you to authenticate them?" Fitch looked at the floor. The veritaserum allowed truth, but it didn't always make it easy. "Albus Dumbledore," he said. "He came to my office on the 7th of November, 1981. He said it was a matter of national security. He said the boy needed to be protected and that the formal process for establishing guardianship would take too long. He said he needed the documents authenticated immediately and that my cooperation would be, he said it would be remembered." "Did you know the underlying documents were forgeries at the time?" A long pause. "I suspected," Fitch said. "The signatures didn't, I wasn't a handwriting expert, but they didn't look right. I told him that and he said they were authentic and that my job was authentication, not verification." "And you complied?" "Yes." His voice dropped. "He was Dumbledore. He stood in my office and looked at me with those eyes and said it was necessary and I was 24 years old and he was Dumbledore." He looked up. "I've thought about it for 15 years. Every year I've thought about it. I told myself it was the right thing, that if Dumbledore said it was necessary, and then the years kept going and I kept not saying anything." He looked at his hands. "I'm sorry. I am genuinely sorry." "I'm sure you are," Bones said. Her voice was not unkind. It was simply continuing. "Were you aware that the power of attorney documents would be used to redirect funds from the Potter family vault?" "Not specifically. He said the estate would be managed." "I didn't ask what managing meant. Were you aware that the documents would facilitate the proxy voting of Wizengamot seats in Dumbledore's preferred direction?" "No. No. I didn't think about the Wizengamot at all." "But you authenticated the documents." "Yes." Bones turned to her notes. "Did Dumbledore instruct you or suggest to you that the documents should be used to prevent Sirius Black from acting as the child's guardian?" Fitch's face moved. He said that Sirius Black was dangerous. That Black was a Death Eater and that if he had access to the child it would put the child at risk. He said the documentation was partly to ensure Black couldn't establish legal guardianship." He paused. He believed it. When he said that about Black being dangerous, he absolutely believed it. "But you authenticated the documents before Black was even arrested." "Yes." The chamber had gone very quiet. "No further questions," Bones said. Marchbanks looked at Dumbledore. "Does the respondent wish to address Mr. Fitch's testimony?" Dumbledore had been listening with his hands clasped on his knees and his eyes on the floor. He looked up. "I can confirm Mr. Fitch's account," he said. "I believed at the time that Sirius Black had betrayed James and Lily to Voldemort. I was wrong. The decision I made, and the actions I asked Mr. Fitch to take, were based on that belief." He paused. "I want to be absolutely clear about one thing. The forgery of the wills was not done to harm Harry. It was done because I needed a legal structure that didn't exist, because James and Lily had not planned for this contingency and there was no time for proper process. I created the structure I needed because I believed Harry needed it." He stopped. "I understand that believing something is necessary does not make it legal. I understand that. What I am asking this body to consider is what would have happened without it." "You're asking us to evaluate the counterfactual," said a wizard in the frontier, an older man with sharp eyes who'd been taking notes throughout. "You're asking whether what you did was justified by what might otherwise have occurred. I'm asking that it be considered, yes. What would have happened without it?" Harry said, from the second tier. Dumbledore looked at him. "You say you did it because of what might have happened without it," Harry said. "So tell me. Specifically. What would have happened if you had filed the correct paperwork, established legal guardianship through proper channels, and let Sirius Black be my guardian instead of putting him in Azkaban? I believed Sirius was the traitor, but he wasn't. We know that now. So set that aside, set aside the incorrect belief, and tell me what would have happened if everything had been done correctly. If Sirius had been my guardian. If the estate had been managed by a legal trustee. If I'd grown up knowing who I was and what I had." Dumbledore was quiet. "You can't say it would have been worse," Harry said. "Because you don't know. You decided you knew, and you acted on that decision, and everything that followed, Sirius in Azkaban, my parents' real wishes ignored, 6 years of my family's resources used without permission, all of that followed from a certainty you had that turned out to be wrong about at least one important thing." He looked at the chamber. "That's what I want in the record. Not that he was malicious. I don't think he was. But that he was certain, and he was wrong, and the cost of his certainty was paid by other people." Marchbanks looked at him for a long moment. "It will be in the record," she said. "Precisely as you've stated it." The chamber broke for lunch at 1 o'clock. They ate in a small room adjacent to the chamber. Vane had arranged it, a ministry courtesy extended to parties in active proceedings. Cold sandwiches and tea, functionally adequate. Sirius sat across from Harry and looked at him with an expression that was still recalibrating. "How are you doing?" Sirius asked. "Fine," Harry said. He was eating his sandwich with the focused efficiency of someone fueling up for a second session. "You?" "I'm watching a 7-year-old take apart one of the most powerful wizards in the world in open session," Sirius said. He shook his head. James would have stood up and cheered. "I nearly did." "Don't," Vane said, from the end of the table. "It would have undercut the moment." Sirius pointed at him. "Exactly the sort of thing James would have said while secretly agreeing with me." Harry looked between them. Something in him was lighter than it had been all morning, not the end of seriousness, but a brief break in it, the way a person smiles during something difficult because the difficulty doesn't erase everything else. "What happens in the afternoon session?" "Deliberation," Vane said. "The membership discusses and votes on the recommended actions. We've submitted our position paper on appropriate consequences. Bones's office has submitted the DMLE's formal recommendations. What did we ask for? Full restoration of the Potter and Peveril estate assets. Formal dissolution of all proxy authorities. Official recognition of Sirius as your godfather and legal guardian in the magical world. Removal of Dumbledore from the chief warlock position pending the outcome of any criminal proceedings. And a formal inquiry into the ministry notary process to prevent this kind of authentication abuse in future." "What are the criminal proceedings?" Harry asked. "That's separate from today's session. Document fraud, misuse of magical power, illegal imprisonment, those are charges that Bones's office will file formally. They go to a criminal hearing, not a Wizengamot session. Vane looked at him. You may be called to testify. Fine, Harry said. You're not worried about that. I've said everything I need to say. I'll say it again if they need me to. He finished his sandwich. Is there anything I should say differently in the afternoon? No. You've been. Vane stopped and looked at his notepad and then put it down. You've been extraordinary today. Don't change anything. Harry nodded. He drank his tea. Sirius watched him with the expression he'd had since November, learning Harry by watching Harry, building a picture of a person he'd been promised and who had arrived fully formed in ways he hadn't expected. Can I ask you something? Sirius said. Yes. When you faced him this morning, when he said you were right, what did you feel? Harry thought about it honestly. I felt sorry for him, he said. I meant it, this morning. I do feel sorry for him. He's brilliant and he genuinely wanted to protect people, and somewhere along the way he started treating the people he wanted to protect like objects he was responsible for rather than people he was responsible to. He looked at the table. That's a terrible thing to realize about yourself. If he's capable of realizing it. Do you think he is? Harry looked up. I think he almost is, he said. I think he's on the edge of it. That's why I said it clearly, in the record, so it was outside of him. So he couldn't keep it internal and private and therefore manageable. So it was in the record and he had to look at it. He paused. Whether he actually understands it, I don't know. Sirius was quiet for a moment. James always said the most dangerous person in a conflict is one who is 90% right, he said. That the last 10% is where all the damage lives. That's very accurate, Harry said. The door opened. The session clerk looked in. 5 minutes, he said. The afternoon deliberation lasted 3 hours. Harry sat in his seat and listened to 73 witches and wizards debate the findings, the consequences, the legal implications, the precedents, and the political reality of taking formal action against Albus Dumbledore. Some of them were straightforward, the evidence was the evidence, the law was the law, the appropriate actions followed. Some of them were not straightforward, and their speeches had the quality of people trying to find the path that preserved the useful parts of a structure they'd relied on without accounting for the damage in its foundations. One witch in the third tier gave a speech that lasted 12 minutes and concluded with the argument that Dumbledore's removal from the chief warlock position would destabilize the chamber at a time when stability was essential, given the ongoing threat of Voldemort's potential return. Harry stood up. Marchbanks looked at him. Lord Potter. The argument just made assumes that the chief warlock position is Dumbledore and Dumbledore is the chief warlock position, Harry said. That he's so necessary to the function of this body that accountability for fraud is a luxury we can't afford right now. He looked at the witch in the third tier. I understand that argument. But I'd like to point out that this body functioned before Dumbledore held the position and will function after. The question of whether Voldemort may return one day is real, and I take it seriously. But the answer to that question cannot be that the person who forged wills and imprisoned an innocent man gets to keep his position because the alternative is inconvenient. The witch opened her mouth. And if his presence in that position is the only thing standing between Magical Britain and Voldemort, Harry said, then Magical Britain has a much larger problem than what's in front of this chamber today, and you should probably start addressing that problem rather than using it as a reason to avoid addressing this one. He sat down. The vote, when it came, was 51 to 22 in favor of all 5 recommended actions. Dumbledore did not leave immediately when the session concluded. Most of the chamber cleared with the efficiency of people who had somewhere else to be and were relieved to be going there. Vane was talking to Bones at the observers' gallery. Sirius was at the edge of the chamber with the wizard who'd been taking notes, having a conversation that looked like it was about something specific and future-facing. Harry was standing at his bench, collecting the Ragnarok documents into his folder, when he heard footsteps on the stone floor and looked up. Dumbledore stood at the base of the second tier. He was not making a scene of it, he was simply there, in his position, at the edge of Harry's space, with the expression of a man who had something specific to say and knew this was probably the only time he'd have to say it. "May I?" he said. Harry looked at him. "Yes. You argued today that I treated you as an object," Dumbledore said. "A piece to be managed. I want to tell you that this was never my intention." "I know," Harry said. "I said that in the chamber." "I know you did." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "I want to tell you that what you are, your intelligence, your precision, the clarity of how you see things, that is not what I expected. I had formed a picture of what you would be when I encountered you, and it was wrong." He paused. "I have been wrong about a great many things, as today has established." "Yes," Harry agreed. "I would ask you," Dumbledore stopped. He seemed to be choosing something. "I would ask you to consider that what comes next, what the prophecy points toward, will require more than legal proceedings and restored inheritance. It will require preparation of a different kind." "I know," Harry said. "I've been preparing. That's actually been the point of all of this." He looked at Dumbledore. "I'm not afraid of what the prophecy says. I'm not afraid of Voldemort, or whatever he is now. I've known about the prophecy for 3 weeks and I've been thinking about what it means." He closed his folder. "What I will not do is what you wanted me to do, arrive at Hogwarts ignorant and isolated and dependent on your judgment about what I need to know. I'll prepare on my own terms. With the people I trust." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. "And if I could help you," he said. "Not as your guardian. Not with authority over anything. As someone who knows things that may be useful to you." Harry held his gaze. "I'll think about it," he said. "Not yes. Not no." A door, ajar. Dumbledore nodded once. He turned and walked toward the chamber exit, the silver hair, the burgundy robes, the absolute composure. At the door he paused without turning. "I am sorry," he said. "For what it's worth." "It's worth something," Harry said. "Not enough. But something." Dumbledore left. Sirius appeared at Harry's shoulder approximately 30 seconds later, having clearly been watching from the edge of the room. "What did he want?" he asked. "To apologize. And to offer future help. Are you going to take it?" Harry picked up his folder. "Not yet," he said. "Maybe eventually." He looked at the chamber one more time, the ancient stone, the old benches, the carved crests on the seat backs. The room where the shape of his life had been decided without him, and now, today, had been decided by him. "Let's go. Aunt Petunia will be waiting." "She'll want a full report," Sirius said. "She'll want tea first," Harry said. "Then the report." They walked out of the chamber and into the ministry corridor, and the heavy stone door closed behind them with the solid sound of something finished. Chapter 6, The seat he was always owed. January came in cold and definitive. The criminal proceedings against Dumbledore were filed on the 3rd, by Bones's office, with the particular efficiency of a department that had spent 6 weeks building a case it was confident in. The charges were document fraud, misuse of magical authority, and unlawful appropriation of hereditary assets. Dumbledore had retained a legal representative, a senior barrister named Croker, who was approximately as old as the charges were serious and who had the manner of someone accustomed to making difficult things navigable. He did not attempt to deny the substance of the charges. The defense strategy, as Vane had predicted, was going to be context and intent. Sirius read about it in the morning paper and said nothing for a while, drinking his coffee in Harry's kitchen, which had become, over the past 2 months, a space that belonged to more people than it had before. Vane came in most mornings. Sirius came every day. The table that had once been a place where Harry ate in careful silence while Dudley dominated the available noise and Vernon held court over his bacon had become something else. Louder. More complicated. More like a place where people were actually living. Vernon had left in November. Not dramatically, or rather, dramatically for Vernon, which meant a raised voice and a red face and the word abnormal used several times before he'd packed 2 bags, declared that this was not the life he'd agreed to, and driven away. Petunia had watched his car until it turned the corner. Then she'd come back inside and put the kettle on. She'd told Harry that evening with the same directness she was applying to everything now, and Harry had said, "Are you okay?" which was a question that had caught her slightly off guard in its simplicity, and she'd said, "I think so," and that had been that. Dudley had taken the development with the philosophical acceptance of a child who had been absorbed enough in his own concerns not to have been tracking the erosion of his parents' marriage. He still occupied most of the sitting room most of the time and still demanded meals at specific hours and was still, essentially, Dudley. Petunia had decided that managing Dudley was a problem for a future version of herself who had more bandwidth. "The criminal proceedings are going to take time," Vane said, coming in and dropping his coat on the hook by the door with the familiarity of someone who'd been doing it for months. He picked up the paper from where Sirius had set it and scanned the front page. "Croker will slow it down wherever he can. That's his job." "Will it come to a full trial?" Harry asked. "Probably. Dumbledore's resigned the Chief Warlock position as required by the Wizengamot decision. He's still headmaster of Hogwarts, that's a school appointment, outside the Wizengamot's direct jurisdiction. He's technically still Supreme Mugwump internationally. The criminal proceedings are the piece that will determine how much comes off permanently." "What do you think the outcome will be?" Harry asked. Vane sat down. "Given the Veritaserum testimony, given the forensic evidence, given what was said in open session, I think he'll receive a significant formal sanction. I don't think he'll go to Azkaban." He looked at Harry. "Do you want him to?" Harry thought about it in the honest way he thought about everything uncomfortable. "No," he said. "I think Azkaban is, I've seen what it does." He glanced at Sirius, who was looking at his coffee. "I don't want him destroyed. I want him to understand what he did. I want the record to be clear. I want the structure he built, the one where he made all the decisions for everyone, to be dismantled. That's what I want." "That's already largely done," Vane said. "Then I want the rest of it to proceed correctly," Harry said. "Whatever correct looks like. Bones will manage it properly." Sirius looked up. "You know what I keep thinking about," he said. "What?" "James. What James would do if he were here for this." He smiled, and it was a real smile, the kind that came more easily now with every week. "He'd be furious about the money. Absolutely livid. He'd probably want to make Dumbledore explain each transaction personally. But he'd also," he paused. "He'd also understand the prophecy part. He knew what they were fighting. He'd have complicated feelings about it." "Did he trust Dumbledore before?" Harry asked. "He trusted him the way you trust a general. You believe they have information you don't. You hope they're using it well. You fight." Sirius wrapped both hands around his mug. "I don't think he would have trusted him with you, if he'd known. I think that's the thing. He would have handed the military judgment to Dumbledore all day. But you? No. You were his son." Harry looked at the table for a moment. "You have his hands," Sirius said quietly. "I didn't notice at first but you do. The way you hold things." Harry looked at his hands. He didn't say anything. Outside, the January morning was bright and very cold, and the kitchen was warm, and Petunia came downstairs and looked at the three of them at her kitchen table and said, without apparent ceremony, "Has someone made tea or are we all just waiting for a miracle?" Hogwarts letters went out in late July, as they always did. Harry's came on a Tuesday morning, carried by a tawny owl that landed on the kitchen table with a proprietary air. The envelope was addressed, as always, to the occupant of the smallest bedroom, which was not Harry's bedroom anymore. He'd moved to the larger spare room in January, another of Petunia's quietly executed decisions, done without announcement and presented as simple fact when he came home from Vane's one afternoon to find his things had been moved. He'd looked at the room, and the bookshelf Petunia had added, and turned to find her in the doorway, and said thank you, and she'd said it made more sense from a practical standpoint, and they'd both known this was not the actual reason. He opened the letter and read it. Standard Hogwarts acceptance. Standard equipment list. Standard instructions for Diagon Alley purchasing. He passed it to Sirius. Sirius read it and grinned, the broad, fully inhabited grin that had been coming more frequently since Christmas, the one that showed what his face had been built to do. First year, he said. James and I got these letters in the same post. He came and showed me his through the window because he'd gotten his first and he ran all the way to my house just to do it. Was he a good student? Harry asked. Brilliant and insufferable about it, Sirius said. Which was pretty much the James experience in general. He handed the letter back. Are you nervous? No, Harry said. He was being honest. Not even slightly. Harry considered. I want to know what it's like. The magic, the formal structure of it. I want to see how it works compared to what Vane's been teaching me. He looked at the letter. And I want to see what Dumbledore does when I walk in. Sirius put his elbow on the table and his chin in his hand. You've been thinking about that. He's still headmaster. He's going to be in that building. The criminal proceedings will take a year at least, and I'll be at Hogwarts for the whole of them. Harry set the letter down. I'm not worried about it. I just want to be clear with myself about what the situation is. And what is it? A man who made wrong decisions about my life is now in a position where he can watch me live it, Harry said. On my terms. That's what it is. He picked up his cup. I think that might be harder for him than it is for me. Vane arrived at 10 with the formal documentation that had been building since January and was now, in late July, nearing its conclusion. The asset restoration from the Potter and Peveril estates had been completed in March, the full accounting, the returned funds, the formal Gringotts certification of restored holdings. The numbers were, as they'd been since October, significant. Harry had reviewed every line of the restored accounts with Ragnarok, who had been visibly satisfied in the contained professional way of someone whose job is correct accounting and who had been watching an account be incorrect for 6 years. What Vane brought today was different. He laid it on the table with the deliberate care he used for important documents. The Wizengamot session is the 14th of August, he said. 3 weeks before your Hogwarts departure. This is the formal ceremony of seat registration, not the emergency attendance you had in December, but the full formal registration of you as an active voting member in both hereditary seats. Harry looked at the document. It was cream-colored and heavy and sealed with the Wizengamot seal in dark wax. At 11 years old. The minimum age provision was waived under the hereditary claim combined with the active inquiry participation, Vane said. The waiver was approved by the chamber majority in February. You'll be the youngest active member in the Wizengamot's recorded history. By how much? Harry asked. The previous youngest was 53 years ago. A girl who registered at 13. He looked at Harry. You'll be 11. Harry read the document. Signed where he was told to sign. Handed it back. You're very calm about this, Vane said. Should I not be? No, you should be. It's just, Vane looked at him. They'd been working together for nearly 4 years. The sessions 3 times a week had become something between tutoring and the most educationally intensive partnership Vane had probably ever entered into. Harry was not the 7-year-old who'd lit a candle blue anymore. He was not, quite, the 11-year-old the Hogwarts letter was addressed to, in any way that mattered. He was Harry, which was its own specific category. "You're ready," Vane said. "I want to say that properly. You are completely ready." Harry looked at him. "Thank you," he said. "For all of it." "Don't," Vane said, in the tone that meant he was going to feel something he didn't want to feel in a kitchen on a Tuesday morning. "I will," Harry said. "You didn't have to stay. You were hired for an audit. Everything after that was because you chose to." He held Vane's gaze. "That matters." Vane picked up his notepad. He made a note that was probably not a real note. "August 14th, he said. 9 o'clock. Formal robes." The formal registration session was smaller than the December inquiry, no crisis driving the numbers, no extraordinary circumstances compelling attendance. About 40 members were present, those who were active on a regular basis rather than the full chamber that convened for significant matters. The atmosphere was different too. Not tense, not the careful stillness of a chamber watching something unprecedented. More matter of fact. A formal procedure, important but established. The chamber doing its business. Harry came in with Sirius and with Vane, who sat in the observers section. He was in formal robes, darker than December, better fitted, because Petunia had taken him to the robe maker in Diagon Alley in June and overseen the fitting with the precision she brought to everything she'd decided to do properly. He sat in seat 14. He placed his hand on the carved crest at the back. Then he placed his other hand on the crest of seat 15, the Peveril seat beside it. Both seats responded, a warmth that ran through the wood and into his palms, old magic recognizing something it had been waiting to recognize for 11 years. The crest on the Potter's seat showed a stag and a lily. The Peveril crest showed 3 objects he'd read about but never seen, a stone, a cloak, a wand, arranged in a triangle. He took his hand off the Peveril seat and looked at the chamber. Marchbanks was presiding again. She read the formal registration text, the ancient language of the ceremony, the acknowledgement of lineage and hereditary right, and Harry responded where responses were required, and Sirius countersigned as his guardian, and when it was done Marchbanks said, "Lord Harry James Potter is formally registered as the hereditary holder of the Potter and Peveril seats. The record is complete." She tapped her wand once. The sound rang through the old stone chamber. That was it. Not a dramatic transformation. Not a speech. Just a tap on stone and a name written in the register and the done thing done. Harry sat in his seat and felt the finality of it, not triumphant, not the sharp spike of victory. Something quieter. The satisfaction of a thing that should always have been true now being true. He looked at the seat registration in the register that the clerk brought round for review. His name, written in the permanent ink that magical records required. Harry James Potter. Lord Potter. Lord Peveril. The youngest registered active member in the Wizengamot's history. He looked at it and thought about October 3.5 years ago, about Ragnarok's meeting room and the first time he'd heard those words, Lord Potter, Lord Peveril, and how they'd landed on him like something from another person's life that he was only just discovering was his. It was his. It had always been his. That was the whole point. Petunia was waiting at Vane's office after the session. She'd refused to sit at home. She'd also refused to go to the ministry, the Muggle exclusion still applied to official chamber proceedings, and she'd decided after a brief argument with herself not to push that particular boundary today, because today was not about the boundary, it was about Harry. So she'd gone to Vane's office instead, because it had a comfortable chair and a kettle and the privacy wards, and she'd brought a book she'd barely read a page of and sat in the late morning light and waited. They came in at 10:30. Harry first, then Sirius, then Vane. Harry was still in his formal robes and looked, Petunia thought with a feeling she'd stopped trying to name, like someone who had stepped into a skin that had been waiting for him. "How did it go?" she asked. "Done," Harry said. He sat down in the other chair. Both seats registered. Sirius signed as guardian. "It's in the record." Petunia nodded. She looked at him for a moment in the way she'd been allowing herself to look at him since November, directly, without the distance she'd been using as management. Your mother would have been smug, Harry said. You said. I was going to say proud, Petunia said. And then smug, yes. Harry smiled. It was a real smile, not the contained thing he kept for general use but the fuller one that came out in the kitchen with Sirius, in Vane's office when something clicked. Both, probably, he said. Sirius was leaning against the bookshelf. We need to talk about Hogwarts preparation, he said. Practically. You're going to walk into that school and Professor Dumbledore is going to, he'll be correct, Harry said. He's been correct since December. He lost his public authority and the criminal proceedings are ongoing. He's not going to do anything inappropriate at Hogwarts. He'll watch you, Sirius said. He'll be very interested in everything you do. I know. Harry was undisturbed by this. Let him. I have nothing to hide. He looked at Vane. What are the things I need to know before I go that you haven't told me yet? Vane looked at his notepad. He'd been making lists for this conversation for 3 months. The subject areas. Theory versus application. Staff profiles. The social dynamics, the house system and what it means politically. The reputation you're walking in with. He paused. Your scar. What about it? Harry touched his forehead briefly. There are theories about what it is, Vane said carefully. Not established fact. Theories. Ragnarok has thoughts and I have thoughts and they overlap in a way that's going to require further examination. I think, he stopped. I think we should discuss it before September 1st. Harry looked at him with the precise attention he used when something was being held back. Tell me now. Vane and Sirius exchanged a look. Harry watched them do it. Now, Harry said. Not hard. Just definite. Vane sat down. He put his notepad on his knee. You know about Voldemort's method of sustaining himself, the Horcrux theory that's been discussed in dark magic scholarship for centuries. The anchoring of a piece of soul to a physical object to prevent full death. Yes, Harry said. You mentioned it in passing in March. I read about it. He looked at Vane steadily. You think there's one in my scar? A silence. We think it's possible, Vane said. The specific circumstances of your survival, the magic that protected you, the nature of the scarring, the connection you seem to have to magical sensing that is beyond normal parameters, Ragnarok, and I believe it's possible that when Voldemort's killing curse rebounded, a fragment of him attached to the only living thing in the room. Me, Harry said. You. Harry sat with this. He was 11 years old, sitting in a warded office in Bloomsbury in formal Wizengamot robes, processing the information that he might be carrying a piece of the soul of the man who killed his parents. He sat with it for approximately 15 seconds. Can it be removed? He asked. Ragnarok believes there's a process, Vane said. It's not, he paused. It's not currently a comfortable process. And we'd need to confirm the theory before attempting anything. Okay, Harry said. How do we confirm it? Ragnarok can run a soul integrity analysis at Gringotts. It would need to happen before Hogwarts, before you're in a place where Dumbledore might notice and want to manage the information himself. Schedule it, Harry said. He looked between Vane and Sirius. Is this why Dumbledore wanted me kept? He stopped and reorganized. Was he managing the Horcrux? Was this part of the prophecy management? Keep me ignorant so I'd walk into the final confrontation not knowing what was in my own head? Another silence, longer. That's one reading of the situation, Vane said. We don't know that's what he knew or planned. But it's one reading. Yes. Harry nodded. He was not visibly distressed. He was doing the thing he always did, taking information in, filing it, finding the actionable path through it. Sirius was watching him with the look he got sometimes, the involuntary James Lily double-take that had never fully gone away, and Petunia was watching Harry with something that had become, over the past 3 years and against all of her prior management, unmistakably love. "Right," Harry said. "Then the sequence is, soul analysis at Gringotts, confirmation or otherwise of the theory, then either a removal procedure or a management plan. Before September 1st. He looked at Vane. "How quickly can Ragnarok schedule the analysis?" "I'll call him today." "Good." Harry looked at his hands in his lap, James's hands, Sirius had said, the way he held things. He looked at them for a moment and then looked up. "I want to say something." The room waited. 3.5 years ago I was pulling weeds in the garden, Harry said. I didn't know what I was. I didn't know what I had. I didn't know anyone had taken anything from me because I didn't know there was anything to take. He looked at Vane, then at Sirius, then at Petunia. "You three are the reason I know who I am now. You're the reason I walk into Hogwarts knowing the score." He paused. "I don't say that to be, I'm not being sentimental about it. I'm saying it because it's true and because I think it should be said out loud." Sirius opened his mouth. "Don't cry," Harry said. "I'm not crying," Sirius said, in the voice of someone who was 3 seconds from crying. "Sirius." "I'm fine," Sirius said, very clearly not fine. "Continue." Harry looked at Petunia. She was very still, with the book closed in her lap, and her face had the quality it sometimes got, the brittle careful quality, the surface over deep water. He'd learned to read it over 4 years. He knew what it meant. "You went looking," he said to her. "When you found the letter. You could have put it back in your pocket. You could have decided it wasn't your problem. You'd been deciding it wasn't your problem for 6 years. He held her eyes. "You didn't. You found a number in the back of your address book and you called it and you brought someone in and you signed a document at a table in your kitchen before you even knew what it would cost you." He paused. "That's not a small thing. That's the whole thing." Petunia's jaw tightened. Her eyes were too bright. She looked very much, Harry thought, like Lily in the way Lily had felt things at full volume and then worked very hard not to show it. "Well," she said, in a voice that was controlled with obvious effort. "Someone had to." "You did," Harry said. "That's the point." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked away, at the window, at the street below, at the ordinary London morning. When she looked back her face was its usual composed self, except for something around the eyes that hadn't quite settled back into place. "You're going to be very difficult at Hogwarts," she said. "God help your professors." "They'll manage," Harry said. "They'll try," Vane said. The Gringotts soul analysis happened on the 21st of August, in a deep chamber far below the main bank that smelled of old earth and rang faintly with something that was not sound and not quite silence. Ragnarok performed it himself, with 2 goblin assistants who moved with the careful precision of people doing work that required precision. Harry lay on a stone table in the deep chamber and stared at the ceiling and felt the analysis moving through him like water finding the shape of a vessel, not painful, not comfortable, simply present. When it was done, Ragnarok stood at the end of the table and looked at his findings with the professional neutrality that was his natural state and then said, "The theory is confirmed. There is a foreign soul fragment attached to the scar. It is stable. It is not currently active. It is, however, present." Harry sat up. "Remove it." Ragnarok looked at Vane. Vane looked at Harry. Sirius, from his position against the far wall where he'd been clenching and unclenching his jaw for the duration of the analysis, said, "Harry, remove it," Harry said again. "You said there's a process. I want it done." "It's not," Vane started. "Comfortable. You said." Harry looked at Ragnarok. "What does the process involve?" Ragnarok explained. The extraction was a goblin ritual, old enough to predate the magical theory that would have been used to explain it, and it was effective but not pleasant. It would take several hours. The recovery time was 2 to 3 days. I have 10 days before Hogwarts, Harry said. Do it today. Sirius pushed off the wall. Harry. You don't have to do it today. I know I don't have to do it today. Harry looked at him. I want to walk into Hogwarts without a piece of Voldemort's soul in my head. That seems like a reasonable preference. He looked back at Ragnok. Can you do it today? Yes, Ragnok said. Then do it. The removal took 4 hours and 18 minutes. Harry would not, in later years, talk about it in detail. What he said, when asked, was that it was like pulling something out by the root, not the thing itself, which he couldn't feel exactly, but the space it left, which he could, a clarity that arrived in stages as the ritual progressed and which was so different from what had been there before that its presence in the preceding 11 years was almost more disturbing than the extraction. When it was over he lay on the stone table for a while and looked at the ceiling. Sirius was sitting on the floor next to him, back against the table, in the way of someone who had decided they were not moving until Harry moved. Vane was standing at the far end of the room talking to Ragnok in low tones. How do you feel? Sirius asked. Lighter, Harry said. Good lighter or bad lighter? Good. Harry turned his head to look at him. Definitely good. You could have waited, Sirius said. I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying. You didn't have to do it today. I know, Harry said. But once I knew what it was, I didn't want it in me for another unnecessary day. He looked back at the ceiling. It was his. It wasn't mine. I don't want to carry things that aren't mine. Sirius was quiet for a moment. James would have said exactly that, he said. You say that fairly often, Harry said. Because it keeps being true. September 1st arrived with the particular quality of a day that has been approaching for so long that its actual arrival has a slightly unreal edge. Platform 9 3/4 was everything Sirius had described, the noise, the owls, the families, the great engine sending steam into the late summer air. Petunia stood on the platform. She'd come through the barrier with Harry and Sirius and had stood on the magical platform without flinching and without comment, though Harry had noted she was breathing slightly faster than usual. She was managing very well. She was holding his trunk trolley because she'd taken hold of it getting through the barrier and neither of them had mentioned it. Sirius was doing the thing where he looked at everything and tried not to be visibly overcome, which he was failing at in the specific Sirius way, bright eyes, slightly too still face, compensating with energy. Compartment seats fill up quickly, he said. Get one near the front if you can. And don't let any Slytherins corner you about politics in the first week, not because you can't handle it, you absolutely can, but because, Sirius, Harry said. Right. Yes. I'll be fine. I know you'll be fine. Sirius put a hand on Harry's shoulder. His grip was solid and steady. I know you will be. He looked at him properly, the full direct look that meant something real was being said. Your dad would have been, he stopped. He would have been right here. Doing this. Making an embarrassment of himself and giving you completely redundant advice because you've been better prepared than any first year in history and he would have done it anyway because that's what it feels like to be your father on this platform. His voice caught slightly. I'm not your father. But I'm your family. And I'm right here. Harry looked at him. He put his hand over Sirius's briefly. I know, he said. I'll write when I get there. Petunia had not let go of the trolley. Harry turned to her, and she looked at him, and there was a moment where neither of them said anything because the thing between them was not a simple thing and didn't need to be made simple. It was 4 years of a kitchen table and Vane's office and a letter in a coat pocket and a girl who felt things at full volume and 2 people who had circled each other with difficulty and arrived, somewhere along the way, at something real. Don't let anyone make you small, Petunia said. I won't. And eat properly. I will. And write. She paused. Your mother used to, she wrote every week. From Hogwarts. Every week without fail. She looked at the train. I didn't always write back as quickly as I should have. Her jaw was very tight. Right. Every week, Harry said. She let go of the trolley. She reached out and, briefly, precisely, tucked the collar of his robe straight. It was not a hug. It was Petunia Dursley expressing something she didn't have the language for in the only register available to her. Harry understood it exactly for what it was. Go on then, she said. He found a compartment near the front and settled in. A red-haired girl with a trunk slightly too big for her to manage alone came in a few minutes later and asked if anyone was sitting here, and Harry said no, and she sat down and introduced herself as Ginny Weasley and immediately launched into a series of observations about the train that were precise and funny and entirely unintimidated by anyone. Harry liked her immediately. A few minutes after that, a boy with the specific look of someone who had gotten lost and was managing this fact with forced confidence opened the compartment door and said, "Do mind if, everywhere else is full," and Harry said come in, and Ron Weasley sat down next to his sister and looked at Harry with the slight wideness of someone who had recognized who he was and was deciding how to handle it. He handled it by saying, "You're Harry Potter, aren't you? Do you really have the scar?" Which was direct enough that Harry respected it. "I do," Harry said. He touched his forehead. The scar was there, the lightning bolt, thinner than it had been somehow since the Gringotts ritual, as if the removal of the fragment had reduced it to its actual rather than its inflated significance. "You're a Weasley." "Ron. You know the family?" "I know the name from the Wizengamot record." "Your family holds 2 seats." Ron blinked. "You know the Wizengamot record." "I have 2 seats of my own," Harry said. "I had reason to know the record." Ron looked at his sister. His sister looked back at him with the expression of someone who had immediately understood that this school year was going to be more interesting than anticipated. "Right," Ron said. "So." He pulled out a packet of sandwiches. "Do you want one?" "My mum always makes too many." Harry took a sandwich. "Thank you." The train moved out of the station and London slid past the window, the ordinary buildings, the ordinary city, the world that didn't know any of this was happening a layer above it. Harry ate the sandwich and talked to the Weasleys and watched the countryside open up as London fell behind, and thought, briefly, about a kitchen in Privet Drive and a goblin bank and a warded office in Bloomsbury and a hospital room where a man had remembered how to laugh, and about the specific shape of the 4 years that had made this particular version of this particular journey possible. Then he put it away and looked at what was in front of him. The countryside was green and moving fast. The train was loud and warm. Ron Weasley was explaining Quidditch positions with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting for a new audience, and Ginny Weasley was interjecting corrections at intervals, and outside the window the world was enormous and exactly as complicated as it had always been. Harry was 11 years old. He had 2 Wizengamot seats and a restored fortune and a godfather who visited 3 times a week and an aunt who wrote back every week without fail and a cursebreaker who still kept a notepad that was mostly full of things he'd already resolved and a goblin account manager who had been waiting 6 years for exactly this to happen. He was not afraid of Hogwarts. He was not afraid of Dumbledore, who would be in that castle and who was, probably, going to have to work very hard at being a different kind of man and who might or might not succeed. He was not afraid of the prophecy, or of Voldemort, or of what the prophecy said their eventual confrontation required. He understood what was coming. He had understood it since a conversation in Vane's office in November 3 years ago, and he had been preparing since then, and the preparation was real and thorough and his. He was ready. Not in the way of a weapon pointed at a target. In the way of a person who knew who they were, who had chosen the people around them, who had stood in a Wizengamot chamber at 7 years old and spoken clearly and meant every word of it. In the way of a person whose story had nearly been written by someone else and who had taken the pen back and intended to keep it. The train rounded a curve and the sun came through the window at a long angle, and Harry James Potter, Lord Peveril, youngest active member of the Wizengamot, leaned back in his seat in the warm afternoon light and listened to Ron Weasley explain the keeper position with a passion that suggested Ron might himself one day want to be a keeper, and the world moved under the train's wheels, and it was, in every meaningful way, a beginning. That evening, in a kitchen on Privet Drive that was quieter than it had been in months, Petunia Dursley sat at the table with a cup of tea and a blank piece of writing paper and a pen. She sat there for a few minutes, not quite starting. The house was very quiet. Dudley was upstairs. The garden was dark. She thought about Lily, who had written every week without fail. She uncapped her pen and started writing. She wrote for 2 pages without stopping. When she finished, she read it back once, and then folded it neatly, and addressed the envelope in her careful handwriting to Harry Potter, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and left it on the table for Sirius, who had a key to the house now and would come in the morning and know what to do with it. She capped her pen. She drank her tea. Outside the window, the first owl of the season crossed the dark sky, heading north, carrying someone else's letter to someone else's child. Petunia watched it until it disappeared. Then she washed up her cup, turned off the kitchen light, and went upstairs to bed, and for the first time since a November 7 years ago she did not lie awake managing her feelings. She just lay down. And slept.